Chapter 2175, Times Have Changed. Black Dragon Empire, Black Dragon City. Many players explored the city's prosperous central district. A 60-meter-tall guild hall, one of the most iconic buildings within the district, sat in its core. This was the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's status symbol in the Black Dragon Empire. More than 10,000 players came and went from the guild hall, many there to apply for the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's recruitment test. Even the weakest of these players was level 64 and wore a full set of level 60 secret silver equipment. Level 65 experts had even shown up, fully geared in level 65 secret silver equipment. When such experts normally applied to first-rate guilds, they were accepted and promoted to core member immediately, but in the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion, even these players would be lucky to join the guild. Even if they were accepted, they'd become, at most, elite members. However, unlike the lively scene outside the guild hall, a deathly silence enveloped the guild leader's office on the top floor. Damn it. Zero Wing has its own chamber of commerce now. Not even Starlink will be able to affect its financial foundation. Nine Dragons Emperor, who was now level 68, paled as he read the latest report. His competition with Phoenix Rain for the Great Pavilion Master position was almost at its climax, and he certainly hadn't expected something like this to happen. He had still hoped to use Zero Wing against Phoenix Rain. After all, she wouldn't sit by and do nothing if her pet guild was in danger. She would send a portion of her strength to support Zero Wing. However, not only had Zero Wing grown stronger, but Phoenix Rain would significantly benefit from this as well. Nine Dragons Emperor knew that she was one of the Candlelight Trading Firm's shareholders. Now that Zero Wing had a chamber of commerce with more than 100 guilds, albeit small ones, it had even more sales connections than ordinary superpowers. With how many master lifestyle players the firm had as well, it was easy to imagine how much profit Candlelight would generate in the future. Pavilion Master, our sides are currently fervently collecting funds to build shipyards and buy lands on Dragonheart Island. If Phoenix Rain's side receives a cut of Candlelight's profits, I'm afraid we'll be in a precarious position, Marshal Dragon said solemnly. I know that. I truly hadn't expected an ant like Zero Wing to develop to this extent. Nine Dragons Emperor frowned again at the report regarding Zero Wing, overwhelmed with regret. Had he known that Zero Wing could become so powerful, he would have done everything in his power to crush the guild in its infancy. Those small guilds have just signed a contract with the Candlelight Chamber of Commerce. They haven't actually begun to work with Zero Wing yet. Why don't we take a forceful approach and show these small guilds the consequences of allying with Zero Wing? Marshal Dragon suggested, a cold light glinting in his eyes as he clenched a fist. It's too late for that. Even if we kill these small guilds' main forces, they'll send their main force members to the bottomless abyss to level. Not even Starlink's influence can reach the regional dungeon, much less ours. And killing their normal and elite members won't harm these guilds in the least, Nine Dragons Emperor said, shaking his head. Unlike guilds, small guilds didn't offer their members many guarantees, especially their normal and elite members. Small guilds barely paid these members any mind, only providing a few guild benefits. These guilds didn't even offer significant compensation if its members died. As long as a small guild could ensure its main force and core members' survival, it could continue its existence. Of course, the opposite was also true. Due to this reason, the challenge these small guilds presented depended on the situation. Now that Zero Wing could offer these guilds' main forces and core members a safe haven, eliminating them would be quite difficult for the Heavenly Dragon Pavilions. A battle of finances was the only reliable way the pavilion could deal with these small guilds now, but doing so would be expensive, and the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion couldn't afford the expenditure right now. There really isn't anything we can do about this? Marshal Dragon asked. There is only so much profit to go around in God's domain. Now that they've established such a powerful chamber of commerce, the others won't be able to remain idle. Moreover, Starlink won't stand for this. This matter will certainly affect Starlink's development in the Dark Knight Empire, Nine Dragons Emperor said, sneering. Starlink has always been so arrogant and unwilling to negotiate an alliance. Marshal, quietly visit Dark Knight City and negotiate our terms with Lu Xinglua. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. I'm sure Starlink will fund us now. Starlink was well known for its wealth in God's domain. At the moment, Nine Dragons Emperor's chances of defeating Phoenix Rain were only 40%, but if he had Starlink's help, he was certain his chances of becoming the next great Pavilion Master would double. You're truly awe-inspiring, Pavilion Master. With this, we'll be able to turn the tables. If Phoenix Rain and Black Flame knew what we were planning, they'd likely go mad, Martial Dragon said, smiling. I'll head to Dark Knight City right away. Following which, Martial Dragon left the office and made his way toward Dark Knight City. Meanwhile, Feng had finally completed his tasks in Stone Forest City. All he needed to do now was to leave the city in Melancholic Smile's hands and wait for the influx of players. He didn't remain idle after dealing with the city's construction. He made his way to one of the candlelight trading firm's forging rooms and started to forge crystal light sets and advanced mana armor kits. Zero Wing and the various guilds needed both the crystal light sets and advanced mana armor kits desperately, but the set equipment was too difficult to mass-produce. Only Feng was able to forge the sets at a reliable cost. If he tasked Cream Cocoa and the other basic master forgers to produce the set, he wouldn't even recoup his production costs, much less make a profit. Feng spent more than 4 days in the forging room and forged 26 crystal light sets and over 1,300 advanced mana armor kits. Not only had he earned a ton of forging proficiency during the past few days, but he had also gained enough EXP to hit level 77. Meanwhile, Stone Forest City's player population had skyrocketed, crossing the 3 million threshold already. After deducting the city's operational costs, Zero Wing had made over 100,000 gold in pure profit from Stone Forest City alone. Stone Forest City's income surpassed that of Zero Wing City and Silverwing Town by multiple times. Not only could Zero Wing afford to pay off all of its debt, but it could also set aside a fortune in savings. However, what had Feng truly ecstatic was the leveling speed of his guild's core members. Maybe it was because the Bottomless Abyss was a God Mode regional dungeon, but over the past 4 days, most of Zero Wing's core members had reached level 68. Some had even risen to level 70. Even Superpower's peak experts were just reaching this level by now. The core members' combat standards had rapidly improved as well, thanks to the complete Refinement Realm legacy Shining Tiger had provided. Although Fierce Snake was the only one of them to reach the Refinement Realm thus far, more than a dozen core members had reached the half-step Refinement Realm. Their development speed was simply marvelous. While Feng instructed Zero Wing's internal members in the guild's real-world headquarters, Liang Jing approached him with an anxious expression. Head Instructor the Big Dipper Dojo has contacted us to inform us that it will cease all cooperation with our workshop and will no longer supply talented recruits. It has also instructed its members to leave Zero Wing. Chapter 2176, Meeting. They're ending our cooperation? The news blindsided Feng. What happened? Are you sure you're not mistaken? Although Zero Wing had grown quite strong and countless players applied to join the guild each day, it still had very few internal members. It took a long time to research all of the applicants' backgrounds through God's domain, and no one could tell whether or not an applicant was a spy from another guild. Most players in God's domain also had jobs in the real world. They couldn't fully devote themselves to the game and treated it as a way to earn some additional income. This was why Zero Wing lacked internal members, despite how many experts joined the guild in God's domain. Now that Zero Wing had nearly 1 million members in God's domain, it needed enough internal members to manage these players. Hence, the guild had been doing its best to recruit internal members. Zero Wing had 2 main sources for internal members, the Big Dipper Dojo and Zero Wing's other main headquarters. Among the two, the Big Dipper Dojo was the most important. God's Domain was a virtual reality game that mimicked reality to a frightening degree. The state of one's body in the real world would affect their body in God's domain to a certain extent. Most of the Big Dipper Dojo's members had excellent physical fitness, and since they were already used to combat, they had a natural advantage in God's domain. In contrast, the internal members recruited through the main headquarters weren't as high quality. Most of these internal members had to be trained from scratch. They needed far more time to become combat ready in the game, something which Zero Wing didn't have much of. However, not only had the Big Dipper Dojo informed Zero Wing that it would no longer cooperate with the workshop, but it was also withdrawing its members. This would severely hamper the guild's operations. Many of Zero Wing's managers were Big Dipper Dojo members. Feng couldn't understand what would have prompted this sudden change of heart. His relationship with the Big Dipper group had always been good. In fact, they were mutually beneficial partners, with the dojo providing talented fighters and Zero Wing training the dojo's members. No matter how Feng thought about it, the Big Dipper group had no reason to dismiss their partnership. I have confirmed the news already. The Big Dipper group's board of directors made this decision themselves. Not even Chairman Xiao has the power to change it, Liang Jing said with a grim expression. Moreover, the Big Dipper dojo isn't the only one. The several other dojos and training centers in the city that we had been negotiating with have declined any partnership as well. The others have abandoned us too? Feng was astonished. Because of Zero Wing's rapid development, the guild urgently needed internal members for its management. Relying on the Big Dipper dojo's members simply wasn't enough. Hence, Feng had instructed Liang Jing to negotiate with the city's other dojos and training centers. Now, however, not only had the Big Dipper dojo abandoned Zero Wing, but the other dojos and training centers had as well. No matter how he looked at it, this couldn't be normal. Chairman Xiao recently contacted me, informing me that he has some important matters to discuss. He hopes that you will take some time to listen to what he has to say, Liang Jing reported awkwardly. After giving the matter some thought, she asked hesitantly, should I reject him? It's fine. I want to meet with Chairman Xiao. Feng understood why Liang Jing felt so awkward. Her prior home had just betrayed Zero Wing, and anyone in her position would feel uncomfortable. It wouldn't even be strange if he suspected that she had been untrustworthy. However, throughout his time working with Liang Jing, Feng knew that she was more than just a capable manager. She was also consistently professional. Even Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow trusted her enough to give her important work. I'll make the arrangements right away, Liang Jing replied. When she realized that Feng didn't treat her any differently than he normally did, she mentally released a held breath. She then contacted Xiaoyu to notify him of Feng's decision. Liang Jing and Xiaoyu quickly decided on the time and place for their meeting. They would discuss matters in the Redstone restaurant, the most luxurious eatery in the city. Feng was a little surprised to hear that he'd sit down with Chairman Xiao there. Although he wasn't particularly familiar with Fenglin City, the first-tier city that housed Zero Wing's main headquarters, he had heard of Redstone Restaurant. Rumors had it that the restaurant had a powerful background. Not only was its food incredibly delicious, but it also provided more for the human body than A-rank nutrient fluid. Of course, the food was also more expensive than A-rank nutrient fluid. Even so, countless professional fighters dreamed of dining in the Redstone restaurant. Naturally, Feng had wanted to visit the restaurant in his previous life as well, but unfortunately Redstone didn't cater to outsiders. Simply being able to afford the meals wasn't enough. Individuals would only be allowed to dine in its halls after becoming a member. Shadow had become a titan in Jianghu City in the past, holding a frightening amount of assets. It had far surpassed the current Big Dipper group. Even so, Shadow had never become a member of the Redstone restaurant. Yet now Xiaoyu had invited Feng to meet there. Feng arrived with Liang Jing at his side at 6 p.m. Contrary to most assumptions, the Redstone restaurant wasn't particularly large, only 9 stories. It also wasn't in the city's business district, but in the outer district. The interior, however, had an antique flair and impressive elegance. As he stepped inside, Feng felt as if he had entered paradise as an indescribable pleasant feeling washed over him. Hello, sir. May I know the room number of your reservation? A tall beauty in a blue dress asked, smiling as she approached Feng and Liang Jing. Although this woman was only a receptionist, Feng could tell with a glance that she was excellently fit and likely a skilled martial artist. The woman's movements were simple, without any excess motion as she approached. It was no exaggeration to claim that an ordinary, provincial-level professional fighter would be a match for this receptionist. In the Big Dipper dojo, she would have been one of the best fighters and lavished with attention during her training. Yet, this woman was only a receptionist in the Redstone restaurant. Room 908, Feng answered after recovering from his moment of surprise. Room 908? Please follow me, the female receptionist answered, astonishment flashing in her eyes when she heard Feng's answer. She immediately adopted a more respectful attitude toward Feng. A short moment later, Feng arrived in a large, lavish room. He felt a gaze lock onto him the moment he stepped through the doorway as a powerful aura washed over him. However, this aura felt nothing like that of a professional fighter. Rather, it felt like that of an assassin with immense experience in life-or-death combat. What a powerful person. When Feng had reached the domain realm, his mental abilities had reached new heights as well. His 5 senses had sharpened beyond an ordinary person's, so he was able to identify the source of the piercing gaze and powerful aura. The man was thin, middle-aged, and wearing a black suit. He didn't look anything like a professional fighter or martial artist. He looked more like a butler as he currently stood next to an indifferent youth. Xiaoyu sat across from the youth with a nervous expression. Feng faintly noticed a few droplets of sweat crawling down his forehead. At the moment, the man looked like a greenhorn in the industry, not the veteran businessman he truly was. Head instructor Shi, you finally arrived. When Xiao Yu saw Feng entering the room, he felt as if he had been granted amnesty, and he stood and quickly welcomed Feng. Instead of bothering with idle chit-chat, Feng shifted his gaze to the youth and asked, "And this is?" "Let me introduce you. This is young Master Han Feng, the Five States Corporation's successor," Xiao Yu said solemnly. "Head instructor Shi, to be honest, I invited you here at young Master Han's request." When she heard the introduction, Liang Jing turned to stare at the indifferent youth from behind Feng. The Five States Corporation was one of the most powerful companies in the country. It dabbled in a variety of industries including energy, combat, food, and entertainment. The corporation could easily squash the Big Dipper group with a single finger. "Your Zero Wings representative?" Han Feng asked as he observed Feng, his face void of human emotion. "You could say that." Feng nodded as he watched Han Feng in return. From what Feng could sense, this youth didn't possess the typical arrogance of a wealthy family's heir. Han Feng felt transcendent as if the youth were a god, overlooking all beings in his domain. He also sensed a peerless strength radiating off of Han Feng. The boy was among the most physically fit Feng had ever met. "If you can represent Zero Wing, I'm satisfied," Han Feng said. "Your guild is quite impressive to make Lu Xinglua suffer so grievously. I am prepared to establish a guild in God's domain, and I want the entirety of your guild to join it. I'll ensure that Zero Wing doesn't miss out on any benefits, and you will enjoy far more wealth and better status than you have now. You'll also have access to more resources than you can imagine." "And what happens if I say no?" Feng asked humbly. Chapter 2177, Clash in Reality. The moment Feng finished his question, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Even Xiao Yu, who had fought in business for so many years, stared at Feng in horror. "It's over. Everything's over now." Xiao Yu felt as if the sky were crumbling down around him. Through Liang Jing, he had learned about some of Zero Wing's accomplishments. He knew that Zero Wing had ties with a few major corporations and that it had even met with these corporations' upper echelons. Zero Wing had been doing quite well in God's domain, a virtual reality game that had become incredibly popular. However, after all was said and done, Zero Wing was only powerful within the virtual reality game. On the other hand, the Five States Corporation was one of the most powerful corporations in the country, wielding unimaginable authority and status. As the chairman's only son, no one in the country's higher social circles could afford to offend Han Feng. Countless companies and corporations would do anything to get into the boy's good graces. Feng, however, had rejected Han Feng's offer without hesitation. He hadn't held back in the least. If Feng angered this youth, not even the major corporations that had invested in Zero Wing would escape Han Feng's wrath, not to mention Zero Wing itself. After the silence stretched for a moment, the youth finally opened his mouth to break it. "Very good. As expected of the person that has made Lu Xinglua so miserable." Contrary to Xiao Yu's expectations, Han Feng hadn't reacted in rage or disdain. The youth remained strangely calm as if this matter had nothing to do with him. "Since that is the case, let's forget about this matter altogether. However, I have to warn you that the Starline Corporation isn't an easy foe. Lu Xinglua has already begun to use his connections against your guild. I'm sure you've noticed, but this is only the beginning. God's domain is involved in far more than you could possibly imagine, and Zero Wing has begun to touch upon too many people's interests. Without sufficient backing, you'd best be careful." Following which, Han Feng glanced at the thin man beside him. The thin man then promptly revealed a card and handed it to Feng. "This is my card. If a day comes when you change your mind, you can contact me," Han Feng said, his voice just as void of emotion as it had been during their introduction. Xiao Yu was surprised to see Han Feng offer Feng his card. He had never realized that the youth viewed Zero Wing so highly as to offer his card. To ordinary people, offering one's card had very little meaning, but for those of Han Feng's status, it was a sign of recognition. It meant that the receiver was allowed to contact the giver directly. Han Feng's status was on par with a dynasty's imperial prince. Even Xiao Yu, a company's chairman, didn't qualify to reach out to this youth. If Xiao Yu wished to speak with Han Feng, he'd have to make an appointment with his secretary. Moreover, whether or not Han Feng agreed to meet with him was an entirely different story. Feng accepted Han Feng's card graciously. Even if they couldn't reach an agreement, a friendship was possible. Moreover, holding a person like Han Feng's card was the equivalent of securing a major customer. If Zero Wing had something valuable enough to sell in the future, it could do so with this contact. Moreover, Feng could tell that Han Feng wasn't like the usual wealthy young masters. He certainly wasn't anything like Lu Xinglua. The youth felt inhuman. Throughout their discussion, Han Feng had remained absolutely calm and was in better physical shape than Feng had ever seen. Even if he hadn't been the heir to the Five States Corporation, he would have had an extraordinary future. If he wanted to become a professional fighter, he'd easily make it to the international level. Not even an internal force expert like Lei Bao would be a match for Han Feng. If Han Feng continued to grow stronger, he could even claim the world championship. Following which, Han Feng and Feng chatted about the situation in God's domain. Feng then left the Redstone restaurant with Liang Jing and Xiaoyu. Once the trio left, only Han Feng and his middle-aged escort lingered in the room. "Young master, aren't you a little disappointed that Zero Wing refused to sell? If we pull a few strings, taking the guild wouldn't be difficult," the middle-aged man asked softly. "Zero Wing's foundations are impressive, but it faces too many challenges at the moment. If we try to take it by force or push the issue of purchasing it, Zero Wing will unravel. That wouldn't be beneficial to our entry into God's domain," Han Feng said, shaking his head. "Moreover, Zero Wing isn't the only available option. Although Zero Wing has more of an advantage, the others have far fewer problems. Overall, they are a better match for our needs than Zero Wing." "If that is the case, why did you request to meet Zero Wing's representative, young master?" the middle-aged man asked. "I wanted to see its behavior and circumstances. I want to confirm whether or not Zero Wing can truly cause Starlink trouble," Han Feng said. "Young master, is there a need to concern yourself with a minor existence like Lu Xinglua?" the middle-aged man asked. "You don't understand. If it were only Lu Xinglua, Starlink wouldn't be a problem, but those behind him aren't easy to remove. I only hope that Zero Wing can buy me some more time. If it proves up to the task, I'll have enough time to prepare," Han Feng explained, glancing at the man. Realization dawned on the butler. However, in the middle-aged man's opinion, Zero Wing will have more trouble making waves now that Lu Xinglua had used some of his connections. Since he had some understanding of management, he also knew that if Zero Wing didn't have enough trustworthy internal members to operate the guild, it would fall into ruin in the long run. Furthermore, Lu Xinglua had only begun to use his connections, yet Zero Wing was already in such great danger. The guild had no hope of surviving very long. Meanwhile, Xiaoyu had remained silent until the trio had moved into a limousine and left the Redstone restaurant. Turning to Feng, he asked, "Head Instructor, this is a rare opportunity. How could you reject his offer? The Five States Corporation's influence is extensive. Even the slightest of relationships with the corporation could help a company's value skyrocket. If the Zero Wing Workshop became a subordinate company, it could operate unhindered even in a first-tier city like Fenglin City. Even Starlink would struggle to take down Zero Wing." The Big Dipper Group dreamed of establishing in a first-tier city like Fenglin City, but it didn't even dare to imagine the freedom of moving without hindrance. Yet, Feng had declined such a golden opportunity. Moreover, Zero Wing's current position wasn't particularly optimistic. Due to Lu Xinglua's interference, no company or corporation had any interest in working with the guild. If this persisted, how would the workshop solidify its position in Fenglin City? Even Liang Jing began to worry as she sat quietly next to Feng. She hadn't known the full story. Now that she knew that the Starlink Corporation was responsible for the Big Dipper Group's abandonment, she understood the severity of the situation. Zero Wing truly stood on a precipice. Their current opponent fought in the real world, not in the game, and the power capital held in reality was no trivial matter. The Five States Corporation might be incredibly powerful, but Zero Wing isn't completely helpless without it. "The Starlink Corporation can't just push my guild around," Feng calmly replied. "Lu Xinglua wants to prevent us from allying with any training centers or dojos. In that case, we'll open a training center of our own." Chapter 2178, Insane Feng. "Open one of your own?" Xiaoyu was a little taken aback and saw Feng's idea as a little too immature. Head Instructor, without exaggerating, opening a training center in Fenglin City would be extremely challenging. Not even the White Clan group is powerful enough to succeed. Establishing its own training center was a good idea for Zero Wing. At the very least, the workshop wouldn't need to rely on others. However, opening up a training center in this day and age was not an easy task. First, in this era of physical fitness, countless people had tried to capitalize on humanity's focus in this aspect and open training centers and dojos, and as a result, competition was fierce. Second, starting a new business required a massive amount of capital. Even ignoring venue costs, the latest training equipment cost a fortune. The state-of-the-art facilities were a minimum requirement for any training center or dojo in a first-tier city like Fenglin, but to attract more consumers, one would need nutrition and medical facilities. Without these basic amenities, nobody would join. The only reason the Big Dipper Group had earned its current status and fame in Jianghu City was its decision to follow the evolving trends early and its decades-long history. Just to open a training center or dojo in Jianghu City required a powerful corporation's full financial support. Naturally, one would need far more capital to open one in a first-tier city like Fenglin. Even the current Big Dipper Group would struggle to succeed. This was why the Big Dipper Group hadn't opened a branch in a first-tier city. Xiaoyu couldn't even imagine where Feng would find the money necessary to open a training center here. He knew quite a bit about Zero Wing, and although it had the support of the White Clan Group, which was slightly more generous than that from the Big Dipper Group, White Clan was already struggling to support Zero Wing's headquarters. How could it possibly afford to establish a training center in Fenglin City? Furthermore, the Starline Corporation had set its sights on the workshop. No financial group or corporation would dare to ally itself with or lend money to Zero Wing. Then, would you be interested in investing in Zero Wing, Chairman Xiao? Feng asked, chuckling. He did not try to rebuke Xiaoyu's claim, quietly observing the man instead. Feng was fully aware of how difficult it would be to open a training center. Aside from his inexperience in managing a training center, the required capital was indeed a massive issue. He had already spent all of the funding Phoenix Rain had invested in Zero Wing to secure Ouroboros's old training ground, although Phoenix Rain hadn't supplied her full investment yet. The funding she had given him was a deposit, which Zero Wing would slowly pay back through a portion of the rent from Stone Forest City's shops and virtual stores. If Zero Wing lost Stone Forest City, the guild would have to return the remaining funds. Xiaoyu, on the other hand, had years of experience with running a training center. If Feng could enlist Xiaoyu's help, establishing a training center for Zero Wing would become much easier. You sure know how to ask, Xiaoyu replied after a moment of silence, smiling bitterly as he examined Feng's serious expression. I have dreamed for many years of opening a training center in a first-tier city like Fenglin, but the Big Dipper Group isn't capable of doing so. The board of directors will never agree to a partnership. They won't even agree to lend you a single cent. I'll think of something to resolve the financial issue. What I'm asking right now is whether or not you, as an individual, are interested in becoming a partner with Zero Wing, Feng clarified. He recognized Xiaoyu's concerns. Even though Xiaoyu was Big Dipper's chairman, the board of directors had the final say in all matters. Unfortunately, who would dare side with Zero Wing while the Starline Corporation targeted the organization? If you are willing to become a partner, I'm willing to offer you 5% of the training center's shares. Feng valued Xiaoyu far more than the Big Dipper Group as a whole. Not only did Xiaoyu have a wealth of experience with managing training centers, but he also had connections throughout the industry, far more than an outsider like Feng. Not even Gentle Snow was a match for the man before him. The White Clan Group, after all, dabbled in a variety of industries. Xiaoyu had to admit that he found Feng's offer a little tempting. He had always wanted to manage a training center in a first-tier city, but doing so was a larger challenge than he could afford. Not only would he need enough funding, but he'd also need sufficient strength. Meanwhile, Feng was even more skilled as an internal force expert than Lei Bao. Even in a first-tier city brimming with experts, he was a force to behold. Feng's only flaw was his lack of fame, but that could easily be resolved with enough money. How large of a training center are you preparing to open? Xiaoyu asked. A training center's size was particularly important. Small training centers with only 1 or 2 floors had no place in first-tier cities. Such minuscule facilities wouldn't even be large enough for state-of-the-art training equipment, much less nutrition and medical facilities. But if Feng could secure a 5- or 6-story building within the city center for his training center, he might just have a chance of survival. Unfortunately, he'd need to own the building, not rent it. With Starline Corporation's harassment, it could easily force the building's owner to dissolve the lease halfway through. I'm thinking about one of the skyscrapers in the city center, Feng replied after giving the matter some thought. If he were to establish a training center under Zero Wing's name, a small building wouldn't do. It wouldn't even be enough for Zero Wing's uses. During his previous life, even second-rate guilds like Shadow had the full support of multiple training centers and dojos, and only with that support had Shadow filled its management positions with trustworthy experts, ensuring the guild's normal operations could continue. If he didn't secure a training center that was on a similar scale to the Big Dipper training center, Zero Wing could stagnate. An entire skyscraper? Xiaoyu could not help but roll his eyes. Fenglin City was a first-tier city, and its land cost far more than in Jianghu City. Even if the Big Dipper group invested everything it could, it would at most secure an 8 or 9-story building in the city center. Meanwhile, most skyscrapers in Fenglin City had more than 40 floors. Is it not enough? Feng asked as he gave Xiaoyu a curious look. If you can purchase a skyscraper, then I wouldn't mind partnering with you, Xiaoyu decided. He felt that Feng had played God's domain too much and gone mad. He had held on to a thread of hope at the thought of managing a training center in a first-tier city, but now Feng's madness had dashed that hope. Securing a skyscraper in Fenglin city center was easier said than done. Did Feng really think it was some cabbage easy to buy and widely available? Satisfied with Xiaoyu's agreement, Feng returned to Zero Wing's main headquarters and logged back into God's domain. Chapter 2179, Stone Forest City's True Value. Bottomless Abyss, Stone Forest City. As soon as Feng came online, he noticed that he had more than a dozen unread messages, all from Melancholic Smile, Yulan, and Blackie. Among the three, Melancholic Smile had sent him 6 messages. Something urgent must have happened in the guild, and Feng immediately sent the woman a call request. What's happened? Feng asked as Melancholic Smile's face appeared on the screen. Zero Wing had considerable savings set aside now and could afford to recruit new members en masse with plenty of funding to spare. The bounty Starlink had placed on Zero Wing's members was of little concern at this point as well. Practically all of the guild's core members grinded in the bottomless abyss thanks to Stone Forest City's relocation, and as a result, the burden on Zero Wing's leveling resources had lightened. Now, even the guild's normal and elite members could safely develop within its territory since other players rarely dared to provoke the guild in these locations. Although Starlink secretly dispatched experts to ambush Zero Wing's members, they weren't able to cause much damage. On the contrary, Starlink had suffered significantly due to the counter-bounty Zero Wing had issued. Every day, a large number of players visited Zero Wing to claim their bounties. Although the situation wouldn't shake Starlink's foundation if it persisted, it would continue to drain the enemy guild's liquid assets, slowing Starlink's development. Starlink expended a lot of high-ranked consumables each day to wrestle control over neutral map's resources, but even as a superpower, it couldn't produce enough consumables to satisfy its needs. As a result, the guild continued to spend its coins on additional consumables. If Starlink did not have enough funding saved, its neutral map exploration would begin to stagnate. Guild leader, Starlink has recently allied with a few other superpowers and 3 chambers of commerce to monopolize the materials for brewing advanced darkness potions and advanced forest potions. Whenever these materials show up on the market, someone from the guild snatches them up at a high price. The prices for these materials have climbed to 3 times the normal rates. Although we have tried to contest for the materials, we've only managed to acquire a small stock. I'm afraid we don't even have enough to brew potions for our own uses, Melancholic Smile reported anxiously. They've monopolized the materials for 2 advanced potions? It seems Starlink is starting to get nervous. The situation actually surprised Feng. Advanced darkness potions were one of the rarer advanced potions in the game. Not only did they increase players' darkness resistance, but they also enhanced players' night vision. It was the perfect potion when exploring areas with dense dark energy. The advanced forest potion was also quite rare. It would increase players' resistance to corrosive effects and slightly improve their perception range. These 2 potions worked wonders within the ancient undead country and bottomless abyss. By consuming both, players could increase their leveling efficiency by at least 30%. Meanwhile, producing these potions required quite a few types of materials. Monopolizing all of them should be impossible for one superpower. These materials originated from different locations, and trying to control all of them would cost an astronomical sum of money. However, if one could monopolize these potions, they'd hamper their opponent's exploration in the ancient undead country and its regional dungeon. Unfortunately, that isn't what's making me anxious. Starlink has begun to offer insane salaries to poach Candlelight's lifestyle players. Not only is it offering huge monthly salaries, but it's also offering to provide a wealth of developmental resources. I've heard that the guild is offering 20,000 credits per month for advanced lifestyle players, and 100,000 per month to master lifestyle players. We've already lost more than 50 advanced players and 2 master lifestyle players. Everyone in Candlelight is talking about it, Melancholic Smile said. We've just established the Candlelight Chamber of Commerce, and we still need a lot of merchandise to benefit from it. If we continue to lose so many advanced lifestyle players, we'll be left crippled. The Candlelight trading firm's lifestyle players relied on their shares of the revenue to earn a living, exchanging coins for credits. Starlink's offer of a stable salary was sorely tempting. As players continued to level up, coins would become more attainable, and as a result, their value would depreciate. However, if one were paid in credits, they wouldn't have to worry about losing income as coins became less valuable. It was only natural that Starlink's offer would attract lifestyle players. Starlink is using its capital now? Feng could not help but chuckle. The concept of paying lifestyle players with credits wasn't foreign to Feng. On the contrary, he was very familiar with the idea. When players had reached level 80 during his previous life, the various superpowers had gradually realized how important lifestyle players truly were. As a result, they had begun to use this method to poach capable lifestyle players, and in the end, even the various major powers had to resort to such a tactic. Many of the poorer powers had been thrown back to the Stone Age, with some crumbling as a result. Guild leader, if we don't take any countermeasures, I'm afraid that we'll lose even more people, Melancholic Smile said worriedly. However, if we use the same tactic, will we have enough credits to support the Candlelight trading firm with how much our guild is earning right now? If we sell our coins, we'll play right into Starlink's hands. It was at this moment that Melancholic Smile realized how truly terrifying a superpower could be. It was actually possible to kill someone with money alone. I'm not sure who gave Starlink this idea, but it should prepare to lose a few teeth if it thinks it can use capital to compete with Zero Wing. Feng declared with a smile. If this had happened before Feng had upgraded Stone Forest Town into Stone Forest City, Zero Wing would have likely suffered, but it was no longer the guild it had been. The various superpowers simply did not realize what Stone Forest City represented. How are the private houses around the battle arena coming along? Feng asked. We finished 70% of them. The remaining 30% will require another 2 or 3 days, Melancholic Smile replied. Although she didn't know why Feng asked, she quickly sent him a report on the construction process. Zero Wing had spent over 160,000 gold over the past few days to build these private houses, and it was undoubtedly the largest investment the guild had made thus far. We have 70% complete? Feng nodded in satisfaction as he inspected the report. Over 7,000 houses should be enough. Publish an announcement that Stone Forest City is renting its private houses to the public. We'll hold an auction for them throughout the Candlelight trading firm's branches simultaneously. We'll only accept credits as payment, and we'll start the bid at 30,000 credits per month. 30,000 credits for 1 month? Isn't that a little too expensive? Feng's price shocked Melancholic Smile. Private houses weren't like shops, which could generate profit for players. Renting a private house was akin to buying a consumable item. They'd be fortunate enough to find players that were willing to rent a private house for a few thousand credits. 30,000 credits per month was just absurd. Relax. Just have someone spread the news. The sooner we get this done, the better, Feng said, chuckling. He did not offer any further explanation. Cities within the bottomless abyss had been holy sites for players in the past. Countless expert players had dreamed of owning private houses in these cities. Unfortunately, the ruling powers had only leased these private houses, but even so, experts had fought desperately to acquire one for themselves. At one time, renting these holy cities' private houses had cost more than 50,000 credits per month. That situation had enlightened God's Domain's players just how much money one could make in the game. Compared to the past, 30,000 credits was quite cheap. Melancholic Smile followed her orders and posted the announcement on the official forums in God's Domain's various kingdoms and empires. Chapter 2180 Crazy Auction. The moment God's Domain's players heard that Stone Forest City's private houses would be available to rent, the news caused a sensation throughout the various kingdoms and empires. I'm not seeing things right? Zero Wing is actually leasing its private houses to the public. This is wonderful. If we can rent a private house in Stone Forest City, we can teleport there anytime we want. Crap. Zero Wing is so scummy. It's only leasing the private houses, not selling them. Almost every player in the game paid close attention to Stone Forest City since they all had optimistic hopes for the bottomless abyss, especially now that players had begun to explore the regional dungeon, spreading the news of their harvests. Many independent players had found fine gold treasure chests, and independent teams had obtained advanced legacies after killing Grand Lords. Even the weakest boss in the bottomless abyss dropped level 65 secret silver equipment, and that was when their luck had failed them. If players' luck held out, even level 65 fine gold weapons and equipment dropped from the weaker bosses. However, the various kingdoms and empires players were focused on something else entirely. Players' leveling speed in the regional dungeon excited them far more than its frightening drop rates. Everyone had been impressed with their leveling speed in neutral maps, but they could level twice as fast in the bottomless abyss. Because of this, the bottomless abyss had become a sacred leveling ground. Unfortunately, it wasn't easy to reach the dungeon's first floor. Even ordinary expert teams suffered annihilation before they got that far. However, the announcement regarding Stone Forest City's private houses alleviated this problem. With a private house, players could teleport to the bottomless abyss at any time from anywhere. They could also teleport to their private houses from within the regional dungeons. It would save them plenty of travel time and they could explore farther than before. However, when the public discovered Zero Wing's intentions to auction off the private houses and the starting bid, they burst into heated discussions. Not only is Zero Wing refusing to sell the private houses, only rent them, but its starting bid is 30,000 credits per month? Is Zero Wing insane? Zero Wing is too greedy. I don't even make 10,000 credits per month. You'd have to be wealthy to afford these houses. That's right. Who would want to rent those private houses at such a high price? Countless players cursed Zero Wing for its fraudulence when they saw the minimum bid. The guild had essentially excluded ordinary players from the auction with such a high price. Only wealthy players would be able to afford to grind freely in the bottomless abyss. Meanwhile, several flashes illuminated Dark Knight City's teleportation hall as a 6-man party arrived. These 6 players were not particularly high-leveled, with most of them around level 56 or 57. The party's highest level player was only level 60. However, she wore a full set of level 60 fine gold equipment and carried 2 long swords of indiscernible rank. Despite her low level, many of the level 65+ experts in the teleportation hall sensed danger the moment she arrived. They couldn't help but turn to look at the elegant girl, who appeared to be barely 20 years old. Tian Tong, do you really plan to compete for a private house in Stone Forest City? The starting bid is 30,000 credits. How can a student like you afford that? The level 56 female cleric, the level 60 female swordsman's companion, asked worriedly. If worse comes to worst, I'll just sell those items. Including what I have on me, I should have enough. My level isn't high enough yet, and I have no choice but to try if I want to level up quickly. I have to catch up to the game's frontline players if I want to compete with Black Flame, Tian Tong, the female swordsman, declared. Big Sis Tong keeps telling me that I'm not qualified to follow her, and the only way I can change that is by defeating him. I'm curious to see how strong Black Flame is to gain Big Sis Tong's recognition. Black Flame is Zero Wing's guild leader. He even earned the title of Sword King from the secret pavilion. Do you really think he'll be so easy to defeat? A level 57 shield warrior said. That is only true right now. Once I've caught up with the frontline experts' levels, it will be a different story, Tian Tong confidently replied as she glanced at the dilapidated long swords hanging at her waist. Her companions had nothing more to say about her ambitions and fell silent. They more or less understood the young woman's strength. She was a monster in human skin. If she hadn't joined God's domain so late, she might have already become famous in the game. The party then made their way to Dark Knight City's candlelight trading firm to participate in the auction for Stone Forest City's private houses. Independent players and guild representatives did the same throughout the various kingdoms and empires. For a time, players squeezed into Candlelight's many shops. Even the various large guilds' upper echelons were shocked to see such massive gatherings of independent players, adventurer team members and guild representatives. There sure are a lot of participants. I know, right? Well, who could possibly resist the temptation of grinding freely in the bottomless abyss? Honestly, I hadn't expected Zero Wing to lease its private houses. I had assumed the guild would keep them for its own members and bolster its strength. We have Starlink to thank for this. I've heard that Starlink has been spending insane amounts of money to poach Zero Wing's lifestyle players, and Zero Wing is suffering for it. The guild must have decided to rent Stone Forest City's private houses to alleviate some of the pressure. But how much can Zero Wing actually earn from renting the private houses? The amount of credits it rakes in will only be a drop in the bucket to Starlink. It might be a different story if Zero Wing sells the private houses, though. Doing so might give it a chance of contending with Starlink. The various powers' upper echelons attending the auctions were more than happy to watch Zero Wing and Starlink continue their feud and take advantage of the situation. Only, in their opinion, Zero Wing was trying to get itself killed by competing with Starlink's on a financial front. Giving up those lifestyle players would be a much wiser move. While Candlelight's guests chatted about the situation, its staff began the auction for Stone Forest City's private houses. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Candlelight Trading Firm. First, I must inform you that due to the limited number of private houses in Stone Forest Town, our firm can only afford to lease a small number. Any player that wins a bid in this auction will gain priority bidding rights in the next. If 2 players bid the same value in the next auction, we will prioritize the player who has rented from us before. So, everyone, please take advantage of this opportunity, the Candlelight Trading Firm's auctioneer explained, smiling as she glanced over the crowd before her. Every guest gulped audibly and glowed with excitement. Players could grind to level 100 in the bottomless abyss, which would take more than 2 or 3 months. Needless to say, players would need to rent Stone Forest City's private houses for more than 1. With prioritized bidding rights, players would have a massive advantage in the next auction. Now that we have that out of the way, let's start the auction for Stone Forest City's first private house. The starting bid is 30,000 credits. Each increment must be no lower than 500 credits. As the auctioneer finished speaking, the venue exploded with sound. 35,000. 40,000. Crap. Everyone's gone crazy. I bid 45,000. Don't compete with me. This one's mine. 50,000. Chapter 2181, God's Domain's Influence. Contrary to ordinary players' beliefs, the auctions for Stone Forest City's private houses had begun with a bang. The prices rapidly climbed as participants placed bids like they were fighting over cabbages. They shouted their bids with bloodshot eyes and fierce expressions as if they would take a bite out of anyone who outbid them. The tension in Dark Knight City's Candlelight Trading Firm was electric. Are you kidding me? This is just for 1 month of rent, yet someone's bidding 50,000 credits? Are these people insane? The level 56 female cleric sitting beside Tian Tong exclaimed, astonished. The original price, 30,000 credits, was already quite high in her opinion. Stone Forest City's private houses were valuable, but they only made it easier for players to reach the bottomless abyss and load them to recover Stami happy face and concentration slightly faster than normal. At most, players with a private house would only get to spend a little more time grinding in the regional dungeon than those without. Zero Wing should thank its stars that players were even willing to rent the houses for 30,000 credits, especially since not many players could afford the price to begin with. Yet, hundreds of players were placing one bid after another. Some players didn't get the chance to finish placing their bid before someone else's voice rose above theirs. In the blink of an eye, the first private house's price had risen to 50,000 credits, and that was just for a 1-month lease. No. They just recognized the value of Stone Forest City's private houses, Tian Tong said as she shook her head. In reality, being able to level up faster is a secondary benefit to them. I heard that the mana in the city is even denser than in the Divine Colosseum. Even after a short stay, players' minds sharpen, and their reaction speed increases. Being able to teleport back to their private houses from within the bottomless abyss will also allow players to spend more time training in the city. If players spend a fair amount of time training there, they might be able to improve their combat standards far faster than training elsewhere. Improving one's combat standards was the foundation for growing stronger in God's domain. Levels and equipment were only temporary measures. To a true expert, nothing was more important than improving their combat standards. This was also why Tian Tong wanted to rent her own private house in the city. While Tian Tong had explained the reason behind these players' passionate abandon to her companion, the bidding for the first private house had risen to 65,000 credits, which made the ordinary participants sigh with disappointment. 70,000. Tian Tong shouted. 80,000. A level 68 ranger almost immediately outbid Tian Tong. 200,000. This first house is mine. A level 69 berserker boldly declared. An uproar shook the venue as soon as the participants heard this berserker's bid. 200,000? That's enough to rent a mansion in a city? The Dark Knight Empire's 26th ranked berserker is here? No. I've heard that Fei Yu has defeated 2 of the Blood Jade family's peak experts. He's now ranked 23rd. Even superpowers have been trying to recruit him. It seems Fei Yu will claim Stone Forest City's first private house. The players present, especially the ordinary players, could not help but silently marvel at Fei Yu's imposing figure. They couldn't understand why an expert like him would be willing to spend 200,000 credits for a month-long claim to a private house in Stone Forest City. The man was simply insane. However, before the auctioneer could slam her gravel once, another voice rose through the clamor. 400,000 credits. The Blue Sky Adventurer team wants this house. I hope that you all can step aside out of respect. A level 70 shield warrior abruptly shouted. As one, the crowd turned toward this level 70 guardian knight, their mouths hanging open in shock. What? Empty Miracle is here too? Blue Sky was the 5th-ranked adventurer team in the Dark Knight Empire, and Empty Miracle, the team's commander, was one of the Empire's top 10 guardian knights. It was rumored that his strength could even rival that of Superpower's peak experts. The man was a large part of the reason that Blue Sky had earned its current position. One of Starlink's elders had even tried to recruit Empty Miracle due to his impressive prowess and extraordinary achievements. He was undoubtedly a powerhouse in the Dark Knight Empire. This is an auction, Empty Miracle. Speak with your money. A robust, level 70 assassin suddenly stood from his seat. Our Windwolf adventurer team has no time for your nonsense. 500,000. 550,000. 600,000. 650,000. Blue Sky and Windwolf fought, outbidding one another for a time. The watching crowd fell silent as they watched. Do they really need to go this far? Isn't it just a private house? That's right. And this is only the first one. Aren't there still plenty available? Can't these 2 adventurer teams let others have a chance as well? No one understood why 2 of the Dark Knight Empire's top adventurer teams were so desperate to rent one of Stone Forest City's private houses that they'd continue to outbid each other. The auction had just begun, and Candlelight had promised to present multiple private houses. If the 2 adventurer teams were willing to set aside their differences, they could rent a private house for a much lower price. How can this be happening? Tian Tong's expression darkened as she watched the scene play out. She had sold one of her valuable treasures to increase her chances of winning a bid. Before she had arrived at the venue, she had collected 300,000 credits. She hadn't thought that she'd have any problems winning a private house with so much money on hand. She had even hoped to rent a private house until she reached level 100 with these funds, but now she didn't even qualify to participate in the auction. In the end, Blue Sky's Empty Miracle had won the first private house for 860,000 credits, shocking every player in the venue. However, just as everyone believed that the astronomical price was only a result of Blue Sky and Windwolf butting heads and that the auction would continue at a far more reasonable pace. 500,000. 550,000. The moment the second private house's auction began, someone placed a bid for 500,000 credits. The second private house eventually sold for a total of 930,000 credits. The third and fourth private houses sold for 880,000 and 890,000 credits, respectively. Moreover, every winner was an adventurer team's commander. None of the ordinary participants had even had a chance. When the auctioneer announced the 11th private house, the various guild upper echelons in their VIP rooms made their move. 1 million. 1,200,000. Once the various guilds stepped in, the lowest closing price skyrocketed to 1,500,000 credits. This is insane. These people must be paid actors. Tian Tong's cleric companion exclaimed. They have to be. Tian Tong couldn't bring herself to agree with her friend, and neither could the other expert players in the venue. All of the auction's victors were respectable individuals in the Dark Knight Empire. Regardless of Zero Wing's reputation, it couldn't afford to hire so many VIPs to fight over these private houses so desperately. As the guild upper echelons continued to compete, many players realized why Blue Sky and Windwolf had fought so fiercely for the first private house. Obviously, the various guilds had decided to concede the first 10 private houses, which were more than enough for the Empire's top adventurer teams. So, independent players like us never had a chance of claiming Stone Forest City's private houses. Tian Tong couldn't help her bitter smile as she watched the Empire's guilds rent one private house after another. A similar scene played out in other kingdoms and empires' candlelight trading firms. For a time, a commotion erupted across God's domain. Chapter 2182, Frightening Wealth. When news of the auction for Stone Forest City's private houses had spread, God's domain's ordinary players began to wonder if the various guilds had lost their minds. Multiple guilds had willingly spent more than 1 million credits to rent a private house for a single month. With that kind of money, they could stay in a 7-star hotel for a month and still have plenty to spare. Yet, these guilds had spent so much to rent an ordinary private house. Crap. Those private houses are only convenient for travel. Do they really have to go this far? The day I own such a city in God's domain will be the day I become a wealthy tycoon. An act. This has to be an act. For a time, everyone in God's domain talked about the matter. Many players had even pushed back their grinding schedules to watch the auctions. When the game's other powers, those that weren't participating in the auctions, found out about the situation, they realized how frightening God's domain TMOY was. With the right opportunity, one could earn a truly terrifying amount of money through this game. Before this, most high-value transactions were conducted with coins. Although God's domain was quite realistic and players could trade coins for credits, most people stuck with the idea that this was only a game. However, these players realized their mistake as Stone Forest City's private houses sold for credits. God's domain was more like another country in the real world than a game. As the private houses sold, one after another, an uproar shook Zero Wing to its core. Guild leader, we have already rented out 1,667 units. The lowest closing price is 600,000 credits, while the highest is 1,740,000 credits. We've officially earned more than 2 billion credits. Melancholic Smile energetically reported. She had assumed that they'd be lucky to earn enough to offer Candlelight's lifestyle players a stable monthly salary, but they hadn't even sold 1/3 of the houses they'd constructed, and they'd already earned far more than they had expected. They could even afford to replace the lifestyle players they had lost, not to mention retain the trading firm's current lifestyle players. Moreover, Stone Forest City's income restored the confidence their players had in Zero Wing and the Candlelight trading firm. In fact, advanced lifestyle players from other large guilds had begun to approach Candlelight, interested in joining the firm. Although Candlelight had been considered a sacred place for lifestyle players, Starmoon Kingdom's various large guilds had offered competitive wages to retain their players. This was the only reason that the kingdom's advanced lifestyle players hadn't flooded Candlelight. However, now that Candlelight offered advanced lifestyle players a monthly salary in credits, these players couldn't afford to ignore the trading firm. Ordinary people couldn't even dream of earning 20,000 credits per month. As long as an advanced lifestyle player joined the Candlelight trading firm, they wouldn't have to toil in a job they hated in the real world. Furthermore, they could earn 100,000 credits each month if they became a master lifestyle player. During the few hours the auction was happening, Candlelight had received applications from over 600 advanced lifestyle players and 5 master lifestyle players. With so many capable crafters, Candlelight wouldn't have to worry about its development stagnating. It seems I've underestimated these guilds and adventurer teams' desperation, Feng said. Even he was a little surprised to hear Melancholic Smile's report. He had expected the private houses to rake in more than the 50,000 credit record of his previous life. He had, after all, established Stone Forest City in the bottomless abyss far sooner than any town had done so in the past. Stone Forest City didn't have any competition either, so demand for its private houses would be far greater than normal. Still, he hadn't expected the demand to be this intensive. However, after giving the matter some more thought, Feng found the situation reasonable. Training, leveling, and treasure, the bottomless abyss ranked at the top in all 3 aspects. It was only natural that expert players would go mad over the regional dungeon, especially peak experts from the various large guilds. These experts wouldn't even mind parting with 2 million credits for such an opportunity, much less a mere 1 million. If they got lucky and encountered a few fortuitous opportunities, they'd gain a massive advantage over their competition. They could even earn back far more income through such opportunities. At this rate, guild leader, it won't take long to rent out all of the 3,000 private houses we've prepared for today. With the money we've earned, Starlink doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of poaching our members, Melancholic Smile confidently declared. Starlink might be able to offer a higher salary to lure away Candlelight's members, but Candlelight could simply recruit more talented players with their current rates. The trading firm would have no issues maintaining its operations. They might even be able to expand. No. I don't want to rent all 3,000 units today. Let's stop after 2,000 units. Then we can rent out another 1,000 units each day, Feng decided, shaking his head. Demand would only increase if they maintained a limited supply. Since he had such a rare opportunity before him, he had to take full advantage of it. By this time next month, he'd have a very difficult time fetching such high prices for Stone Forest City's private houses. Moreover, players hadn't discovered all of the benefits these private houses had to offer. Once they did, prices would rise even higher. 2 billion credits were enough to settle the crisis Candlelight and Zero Wing faced, so he didn't mind waiting a few more days before renting off the rest of the houses. He also wanted to set up his own training center in Fenglin City, which would cost a huge sum of credits. Initially, Feng had planned to build even more private houses and shops in Stone Forest City to earn the necessary funding for his training center, but looking at it now, the first batch should be more than enough. We're only renting out 2,000 units today? I'll inform our auctioneers right away. It didn't take long for Melancholic Smile to recognize what Feng was trying to do. She immediately contacted her staff members in Candlelight's many shops. Shortly after Melancholic Smile relayed the command, the remaining private houses had been rented. Everyone, we've rented out all of the private houses we had prepared for today. Please visit us tomorrow, the excited auctioneers announced to their audience's disappointment. The announcement caused a ruckus throughout the various auction venues. What's going on? Why aren't there more available? Crap. You guys barely gave us anything. How could you run out so quickly? I was just about to make my move. The various guild representatives expressed their frustration about the auction's sudden conclusion. Many of the representatives that had held back regretted their decisions. Originally, they had planned to wait out their competition before making a move. That way they could win a private house for much cheaper, but it seemed that their plans had backfired. Tiantong, everyone has gone insane today. Let's wait a few days before we return. The various powers experts should have sated their appetite by then. You shouldn't have any issues winning a bid, the level 56 cleric beside Tiantong advised. I agree. Tiantong nodded. The auction's first few days would be particularly lively, but once the various powers had their fill, prices would fall. The various representatives then returned to their respective cities. Some of the visiting powers had left behind players to keep an eye on the trading firm and report back if anything new surfaced regarding the private houses. Naturally, the players that had won a private house promptly made their way to Stone Forest City to prepare for their conquest in the bottomless abyss. Now, every second counted. Chapter 2183, Private Houses Hidden Effect. Bottomless Abyss, Stone Forest City. As the auctions ended, the players that had won their bids made their way to their new properties. However, these experts were stunned after teleporting to their private houses. How is this possible? Everyone was astonished to find a new buff icon in their status window. High Mana State. While this buff was in effect, players would receive another buff that increased their maximum stamina and concentration by 20% for 12 hours after resting for 8 hours in their private houses. If players rested for 12 hours, the buff's duration would increase to 18 hours. These experts were ecstatic over the new discovery. In the bottomless abyss, stamina and concentration consumption rates were a player's biggest weakness. They could only grind in the God Mode regional dungeon if they found a way to maintain these stats. Now, they discovered that they could have 20% more stamina and concentration by simply resting for some time in their private houses. This would greatly extend their activity time and boost their leveling speed. The visiting expert players wasted no time in reporting this to their respective superiors. What's going on? Players can only accumulate the double EXP buff in Stone Forest City's hotels, but they can gain more stamina and concentration by relaxing in a private house? Doesn't that mean players with private houses will level 20% faster than players who don't have one? If that's the case, we have to get more private houses tomorrow. For a time, the various powers received notifications regarding the private houses' hidden effect, re-evaluating their previous opinions. The various powers had only viewed Stone Forest City's private houses as a convenient travel tool, But now that they had learned that these houses could increase players' stamina and concentration, they had taken on a whole new meaning. If they could secure 20 private houses and send an entire team to take advantage of this buff, the team's leveling speed would be far faster than a mere 20% boost allowed. The combat power an individual could exhibit was on a different level than fighting with a team. Moreover, players would drastically reduce their stamina and concentration consumption rates by fighting alongside teammates. If an entire team had a 20% maximum stamina and concentration buff, they'd be able to last in the bottomless abyss for more than 30% longer than teams without the buff. With so much more time, the team could explore more of the dungeon, reducing the number of competitors it would face. Much of the bottomless abyss's first floor was home to dark demonkin as well. These dark demonkin looked similar to humans, but unlike humans, magic circuits covered these demonkins' entire bodies. They also bore a third eye on their foreheads, and they had an affinity for mana that rivaled the elves. Factoring in the bottomless abyss's environment, a random level 65, chieftain-ranked dark demonkin could effortlessly defeat ordinary expert players. If an expert party encountered a lord-ranked dark demonkin, the party would lose half of its members before it killed the monster if it didn't react appropriately. To make matters worse, dark demonkin were very difficult to sense unless players spotted them. They were skilled with ambush tactics and hid their auras with magic. When exploring the bottomless abyss, players had to remain on high alert, which substantially increased their stamina and concentration consumption rates. Unfortunately, players had no other choice as even refinement realm experts would die if they weren't careful. This situation instilled a deep fear for the various powers teams, making them hesitant to venture too far into the first floor. They constantly worried that they wouldn't have enough stamina and concentration for the return trip, and if that happened, they'd likely die and lose several days of effort. Thus, the various powers expert teams had remained in the first floor's outer region so far. However, if an entire team had the buff Stone Forest City's private houses provided, they could easily venture farther into the first floor. God's Domain's powers immediately began to collect their funds. They also sent more people to the candlelight trading firm's shops, those that would participate in the auction, to increase their chances of winning more bids. For a time, Candlelight's shops were packed with players. The shops in Stone Forest City, Zero Wing City, White River City, and Dark Knight City in particular held massive crowds. The crowds were so large that players were nearly forced to wait outside. Passing players who had hoped to visit the shops were stupefied. What's going on? Why have so many guilds gathered here? That's right. There weren't this many people during the last auction for Stone Forest City's private houses. Peeking in from the doorways, players spotted representatives from more than 100 guilds in Candlelight's shops. Although most were from small guilds, there were quite a few players formed first and second-rate guilds. While everyone wondered why so many powers had flooded the Candlelight trading firms, the firm began the second auction for Stone Forest City's private houses. Due to the increased number of participants, Candlelight had employed entry restrictions. Now, players had to hold more than 500,000 credits to participate. This change elicited curses from the various independent players. Some even criticized Zero Wing for being full of itself, claiming that the guild would never sell so many houses for such high prices. However, when the auction began and news spread, everyone was forced into silence. Unexpectedly, every bid on the second day opened at 2 million credits, and all of the participating guilds fought to outbid each other. Most of the adventurer teams taking part hadn't even gotten a chance to call out a bid before they had been disqualified from the auction. Only top adventurer teams barely held on. By the time players had claimed the second day's 1,000 units, the income from a single private house had hit a new record at 2,360,000 credits, far more than the 500,000 credits on the previous day. For a time, every player in God's Domain was shaken. Insane. These guilds have gone insane. The independent players that had hoped to compete stared at the price incredulously. Did they really need to spend so much on a private house? However, the record broke once again on the third day, with the highest bid closing at 2,570,000 credits. Seeing this, Tian Tong began to despair. On the fourth day, the highest closing bid reached 271 credits, and on the fifth, it hit 2,820,000 credits. By this point, the various adventurer teams were little more than decoration in the auction venues. Only the various guilds could afford to compete. Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow were astonished. They had never dreamed that Stone Forest City's private houses would be so lucrative. By the time the 6 days auction had ended and players had claimed all 7,000 private houses, Zero Wing had accumulated 13.7 billion credits. To hold that kind of money, a first-rate guild would need investments from multiple financial groups and corporations. However, Feng knew that he would only earn this much money once. As players reached higher levels and gained better equipment, they wouldn't need to depend on private houses nearly as much as they did now. Moreover, now that the various powers had seen how much potential wealth there was to gain, they would do everything in their power to establish guild towns in the bottomless abyss. Once they did, these private houses would only go for between 30,000 and 50,000 credits. This was Feng's only chance to make such a fortune. Meanwhile, Zero Wing had rapidly developed during the past 6 days. Almost all of the guild's expert players had reached level 70, and it now had 43 refinement realm experts in its midst. Since Feng had sent Fire Dance to train an unyielding soul system, which didn't limit her options, she had broken through to the flowing water realm. Because Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow had been bogged down with the guild's affairs, they hadn't been able to devote themselves to their training fully. Hence, they were shy of reaching the flowing water realm, but it was only a matter of time before they crossed the threshold as well. Unfortunately, Zero Wing's recent development had brought a lot of issues to the surface. Due to the sudden loss of so many internal members, the guild wasn't able to raid as many dungeons or complete as many field operations as before. As a result, the gap between the guild's upper and lower hierarchies grew. If this persisted, Zero Wing's development would start to stagnate. It's about time that I set up that training center. Inspecting the guild's current funds, Feng decided that he couldn't set the matter aside any longer. God's Domain's various large guilds in the past had either had access to their own training centers or partnered with already established centers. Not only had this provided fresh blood, but it had also earned these guilds a stable income. Only the guilds with strong support from training centers or dojos had had a chance of becoming overlords in the game. Without that support, stronger competitors had stifled their development. Chapter 2184, Opening a Training Center. The sun shone brilliantly that morning and a cool breeze brushed by. As soon as Feng left his virtual gaming cabin, he contacted Liang Jing and took her with him to the center of Fenglin City to purchase a training center. Due to the current trends, professional fighters were far more famous than actors or singers, so tons of people aspired to become one. Naturally, plenty of people wanted to capitalize on that aspiration and open their own training centers and dojos. However, this was also why the competition between training centers and dojos in big cities was so intense, even cruel. Aside from the costs of upgrading training and medical facilities, training centers and dojos had to pay significant fees to research and produce nutritious meals. Only then would their members be able to train efficiently. Individuals would see twice the results with half the training as long as they maintained proper nutrition. Overall, running a training center or dojo was a very expensive business. If one failed to manage their business properly or lacked sufficient capital, they might not even last a few years, especially in a first-tier city like Fenglin City. Plenty of training centers or dojos from smaller cities tried to establish themselves in Fenglin City every year, but most never succeeded. Aside from forging crystal light sets and advanced mana armor kits in God's Domain, Feng had a team grind bosses on the bottomless abyss's first floor over the past few days. During the day, he spent most of his time surveying potential buildings for his training center. After several days of searching, he finally decided to buy the Century Training Center, which was only a short distance away from the city's fighting arena. Although the Century Training Center's facilities were somewhat outdated, it had an excellent location. Most importantly, it was large enough for Feng's purposes. The training center occupied a 51-story skyscraper. It had only been open for a little over a year, so the building was still quite new. Although it wasn't quite as large as Zero Wing's main headquarters, it shouldn't have any issues accommodating nearly 10,000 people, more than enough for Zero Wing's current internal members. Moreover, the Century Training Center's previous owners were selling the building for relatively cheap, only 8.9 billion credits. Feng wouldn't need to redesign the building's interior either. He only needed to purchase the latest training and medical equipment, and the training center would be ready for business. Feng spent nearly half a day signing the necessary documents. Once he completed the purchase, he called Xiao Yu. "Chairman Xiao, I've settled the matter regarding the training center. Would you like to come see it?" Feng asked, smiling. "It's done already?" Xiao Yu was stunned. In Xiao Yu's opinion, Feng should have needed 2 or 3 months to secure a training center. Gathering the necessary funding would be a major problem, and Feng's hope of purchasing a skyscraper in the heart of Fenglin City was a fool's dream. Moreover, in his opinion, the fact that Feng was trying to buy a skyscraper in the heart of Fenglin City was a fool's dream to begin with. Not even the White Clan group would be able to afford such a massive expenditure unless it sold some of its assets, and the Big Dipper group's investment wouldn't change anything for Zero Wing. Yet, only a few days since their last meeting, Feng called to say he had bought a skyscraper. That's right. Now, I just need to purchase equipment and upgrade its facilities, Feng said, nodding. All right. I'm on my way, Xiao Yu said. Feng's earnest expression did nothing to quell the old man's skepticism, so he had to verify the information himself. A few hours later, Xiao Yu arrived at the address Feng had given him. He was dazed when he saw the skyscraper. The Century Training Center? How can this be? Xiao Yu stared up at the towering building in utter shock. As the Big Dipper Group's chairman and someone who dreamed of opening a training center in a first-tier city, Xiao Yu knew a little about Fenglin City's training centers and dojos. He recognized the Century Training Center the moment he arrived. Since it had failed to produce any skilled fighters in the national fighting competition, it had lost business. Because of that, the Century Training Center had been trying to sell its branch in Fenglin City to recoup some of its losses and fortify his position in second-tier cities. One would need nearly 10 billion credits to purchase Fenglin City Century Training Center. 10 billion. Not even the Big Dipper Group could afford 1/3 of this building. Chairman Xiao, will a training center of this size be sufficient? Feng asked politely. Sufficient? Of course it's sufficient. As long as we promote the training center and upgrade its facilities, we'll have no issues recruiting new members. Xiao Yu exclaimed, already considering multiple plans for the future. Wonderful. Then I'll have to trouble Chairman Xiao to see to the remaining issues. I'll transfer funds to you in a moment for purchasing equipment and advertising, Feng said. When he saw the confident light in Xiao Yu's eyes, he knew the matter was as good as dealt with. Now he'd just need to wait for the training center to recruit and supply skilled fighters for Zero Wing. As long as the training center supplied enough internal members, Starlink would find it far more difficult to hinder Zero Wing's development. The guild simply had too many advantages. Once I receive the funds, I'll contact my suppliers. I believe they can transfer everything we'll need in 1 or 2 days, Xiao Yu said, nodding. Noticing that Feng didn't waver when he spoke of spending so much money, the young man became even more of a mystery to him. Xiao Yu was very familiar with Feng's background. The young man and his niece had been classmates, so he had looked into him. Even though Feng was a combat genius, Xiao Yu had considered him a fledgling in high society. Since Feng was from a family without a background, he should have needed a decade or so to accomplish anything impressive. Yet, the more time the old man spent with Feng, the more he became unfathomable he became. First, Feng had snagged Fenglin City's White Clan group as a partner. Then he had purchased Century Training Center's old building. Xiao Yu could also tell that Feng was responsible for these decisions. Everything should arrive in 2 days? If that's the case, we should host our grand opening in 3 days. I'll also have to trouble you with hiring instructors and management staff, Feng replied after giving the matter some thought. Time waited for no one. He needed to recruit more internal members for the guild as soon as possible. That won't be a problem, but what do you plan to name the training center? Xiao Yu asked. We can't promote it without a name. Let's call it Heaven's Rumble Training Center, Feng decided. Originally, Feng had planned to give the training center Zero Wing's name as well, but it was too well known right now. Naming it after the guild would only bring the various major powers down on their heads. It was best that he gave it an ordinary name. All right then. I'll see to the necessary arrangements, Xiao Yu said, nodding. Xiao Yu left, immediately turning his focus to Heaven's Rumble Training Center's management. Of course, the news that the Zero Wing Workshop was preparing to open a training center in Fenglin City quickly spread. Chapter 2185, Experts Gather. Fenglin City, Redstone Restaurant. A thin, middle-aged man respectfully entered one of the restaurant's top-floor VIP rooms. Once inside, he approached an indifferent youth who currently meditated. Although the young man sat there quietly, he felt like the room's overlord. Any enemy of his would become everyone's enemy in the room. Why are you in such a hurry, old Zhua? Feng asked as he opened his eyes, glancing up at the middle-aged man. I've just received news that Zero Wing is opening a training center in Fenglin City. Moreover, it purchased one of the city's well-known training centers to do so, the butler Zhuolinqiu reported. Interesting. It seems Zero Wing is quite capable after all. I had thought that the organization would run to me for help once it faced a financial crisis. I hadn't expected it to earn a fortune through leasing Stone Forest City's private houses. And now it's even opening its own training center, Feng calmly mused. Young master, although Zero Wing can afford to open a training center, how can setting one up in Fenglin City be so easy? Zhuolinqiu commented disdainfully. According to our information, Lu Xinglua has prepared for this and hired a particularly skilled expert. By the sounds of it, he wants his expert to cause a ruckus in the training center, preventing it from taking root in the city. It was true that one needed enough capital to open a training center, but money wasn't enough to keep one alive. One also needed sufficient strength to defend it, especially in a city as competitive as Fenglin. In that case, I want you to visit Zero Wing's new training center. At the end of the day, we can still use the organization to slow Starlink down, Feng said as he sent a glance at Zhuolinqiu. Understood. With a bow, Zhuolinqiu turned and left the room. Meanwhile, news of Heaven's Rumble Training Center's grand opening shook Fenglin City's fighting industry. With the Starling Corporation's Lu Xinglua targeting Zero Wing, no one dared to ally with the organization for fear of attracting the corporation's ire. Now that Zero Wing had opened its own training center, even a fool knew that Lu Xinglua would make his move. At least it would be interesting to watch. Moreover, the various training centers and dojos throughout the city viewed the fact that this company, which focused its business within virtual reality games, was trying to make a name for itself in Fenglin City's fighting industry as both foolish and a blatant insult. Even on the off chance that Lu Xinglua left Zero Wing's training center alone, they wouldn't let the organization get away with this transgression. Otherwise, they'd become laughingstocks in the industry. While the various training centers and dojos discussed Zero Wing's new facility, Xiaoyu had been methodically planning the Heaven's Rumble Training Center's grand opening. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Not only had Xiaoyu purchased the latest training and medical equipment available over the last 3 days, but he had also invited many of Fenglin City's VIPs to attend the grand opening. Fortunately, he had far more connections than a young man like Feng. On the day in question, luxury cars stopped by the building's entrance in droves, and many passers-by grew interested in visiting the training center as a result. However, most of the people that visited Heaven's Rumble Training Center that day were young, passionate fighters. They had all seen the advertisements boasting Heaven's Rumble's state-of-the-art facilities, and they were curious to inspect the training center themselves. The world's technology constantly improved, and with the help of proper data analysis, one could build the best training routine possible, improving far faster than training under a famous instructor. The instant these combat enthusiasts entered Heaven's Rumble Training Center, they were flabbergasted. People wearing the uniforms of Fenglin City's various training centers and dojos filled the main hall. Some of them were even well-known experts in the city, and a few of the upper echelons from the city's training centers and dojos had even made an appearance. Crap. What's going on? Why are so many of Fenglin City's experts here? Isn't that Luo Qianxing who won 3rd place in Fenglin City's annual fighting competition last year? Quick look. It's Master Yang from the Extreme Light Dojo. I've heard rumors that he stopped participating in public events to prepare for the international fighting competition. Am I seeing things? Isn't that Qin Tianhe the Martial Heart Dojo's master? I thought he already retired from the public scene. Why is he here? What kind of power does this training center have behind it? With so many of Fenglin City's experts gathered, the young men and women who visited the training center out of curiosity grew excited. They even wondered if they had stumbled upon Fenglin City's annual fighting competition, rather than a new training center's grand opening. Why else would so many well-known experts be here? While the young fighting enthusiasts were shocked over finding so many of the city's VIPs in one place, a group consisting of 2 young women and a young man entered the hall, immediately attracting everyone's attention. The reaction was mostly due to the 2 young women. One wore an elegant, white dress, which highlighted her long, flowing hair and exquisite appearance. She had the body of a goddess, and many of the women in the crowd became self-conscious. A second exceptional beauty in a bright, red dress stood next to her. When the 2 women entered the hall, they instantly became the center of attention. Even the young man that accompanied these women was exceptionally handsome, and many of the ladies in the hall swooned. The handsome young man was the previous year's champion of Fenglin City's annual fighting competition, known for possessing a talent that only emerged once a decade in the city. He had also qualified to participate in the international fighting competition, and his status as the heir to the Zhang clan group, one of the city's top 5 financial groups, was just icing on the cake. Qingxue, most of these experts don't seem to be here with honest intentions. I'm afraid that this friend of yours will have a very difficult time maintaining a training center in Fenglin City, Zhang Wuya told by Kingswell as he glanced over the crowd. If your friend can't handle the pressure, I'm willing to step up for him. I suspect that most of these training centers and dojos will take a step back out of respect. Sure, Feng is an internal force expert as well, big brother Zhang. Shouldn't he be able to handle the situation? Zhao Yueru asked. An internal force expert might be impressive in 2nd and 3rd tier cities, but this is Fenglin City. Every well-known training center and dojo in the city has its own internal force expert. Moreover, they are experienced veterans. Their accomplishments with internal force are far more impressive than a youngster who has just mastered the techniques, Zhang Wuya explained. Bai Qingxue and Zhao Yueru's expressions darkened slightly after listening to their companion. They had never thought that opening a training center would be so difficult. While Bai Qingxue's group chatted amongst themselves, another commotion rattled the crowd in the main hall. An imposing bear of a man entered the room. 2 knife scars decorated his face, and his arrival shocked many of the training centers and dojo's upper echelons. The instant this man appeared, many of the training center and dojo upper echelons present could not help but reveal shocked expressions. Why is he here? When Zhang Wuya saw the new arrival, fear flashed in his eyes. Is he someone powerful? Zhao Yueru asked when she noticed Zhang Wuya's trepidation. Powerful? Zhang Wuya shook his head. That word is no longer sufficient. He's practically a devil. He has earned the nickname T-Rex for how heavy-handed he is in combat. No fewer than 20 internal force experts have suffered defeat at his hands. Some of them are still lying in their hospital beds. He was banned from the fighting world for that very reason. Most of that happened more than a decade ago, but according to recent rumors, it seems he has defeated another internal force expert overseas. I don't even think I can stop him if he tries to make a move. While everyone made a fuss, Wang T-Rex, Zhongquan stepped into the center of the hall. I've heard that Heaven's Rumble has set up shop here. Who's in charge? I, Wang Zhongquan, want to spar. I want to see whether or not Heaven's Rumble qualifies to do business in Fenglin City. Wang Zhongquan shouted, his voice echoing throughout the hall. Most people immediately took a step back. Heaven's Rumble is doomed. I doubt anyone in Fenglin City can save it now that this demon has shown up. The Starling Corporation is certainly powerful. It's even hired this monster to cause trouble. Zero Wing should have just stayed in its virtual reality game instead of meddling in the fighting industry. As the various training centers and dojos experts watched Wang Zhongquan, they knew that Heaven's Rumble Training Center would soon go out of business. It would also be the first training center to close on the same day it opened. Suddenly, however, a crisp voice rang out over the crowd's muttering. I don't know who you are, but I'm afraid that you don't qualify to challenge our hall master. Instinctively, the crowd turned toward the voice's origin. The speaker was a graceful, mesmerizing woman, and none other than Fire Dance's player. Chapter 2186, Fighting an Internal Force Expert. The various training centers and dojos experts were stunned when they saw Fire Dance. Who's this little lady? Is she tired of living? Although none of them recognized Fire Dance, her identity didn't matter, even if she was an heiress to a large corporation or a member of a powerful family. Wang Zhongquan was still a merciless person. Ordinary people, at most, knew this man had recently defeated Demon Wolf, an apex internal force expert overseas. However, these experts knew that Wang Zhongquan had been banished from the fighting industry in the past and had resorted to mercenary work. He was a cold-blooded monster that had secretly ended many experts' lives with his own hands. It was rumored that he was even responsible for the deaths of a few great families' upper echelons. If Wang Zhongquan wanted to, he could even slay a large family's heirs, regardless of how many bodyguards protected them. As far as the crowd was concerned, Fire Dance was suicidal to provoke Wang Zhongquan so blatantly. Unexpectedly, however, the bear-like man didn't seem angry. He watched her for a moment before grinning, then asked, if that's the case, little lady, How do I earn this qualification you speak of? His goal was simple. He wanted to ensure that Heaven's Rumble Training Center's reputation hit rock bottom. His biggest concern was that Heaven's Rumble would refuse to fight him. He had earned quite a reputation after all. No one would look down on the training center if it declined his challenge. Hence, when this ignorant girl had stepped up to provoke him, he inwardly celebrated. Now Heaven's Rumble would have no choice but to accept his challenge, and he could take his time toying with the training center and humiliating its management. Heaven's Rumble would never gain a foothold in Fenglin City. Our youth are so impatient. After hearing a few insulting words, she leaped into his trap. Her comment has ensured that Heaven's Rumble will have to face Wang Zongquan, Qin Tianhe, the martial art dojo's master, and an old man in his 50s, said, shaking his head. He then turned to Xiao Yu and said, Old Xiao, I'm afraid that disaster will befall the young man you mentioned. Won't Wang Zongquan back out if you make an appearance, Master Tianhe? Xiao Yu anxiously asked. He was exasperated over Fire Dance's impatience. He knew she was an expert that had proven herself against one of the White Tiger Dojo's intermediate disciples, but Wang Zongquan was an expert among experts. When she had stepped forward, she had only caused more trouble for Heaven's Rumble Training Center. Now Qin Tianhe was their only hope. Qin Tianhe had risen to fame for his martial art mastery many years ago. Even the White Tiger Dojo's Jianghu Tianyuan had to show a little respect before this old man. Qin Tianhe was unquestionably powerful. He had ranked among the top 32 in the international fighting competition during his peak. Ranking among the top 32 fighters might not seem impressive, but they were talking about the largest fighting competition in the world. One had to be an expert among experts just to qualify for the competition, and hundreds of martial artists participated. Wang Zongquan had only ranked among the top 64 fighters during his peak. If I were 15 years younger, I might be able to contend with him, but now, Qin Tianhe said, shaking his head. Youthful vigor was gold in martial arts. This saying rang true both in the past and the present. Wang Zongquan was only 38 this year, and with today's technology he was still in his prime. Proving the point, the bear-like man had defeated Demon Wolf, who wasn't any weaker than Qin Tianhe during his peak. Is it really over just like this? Xian Yu felt as if his soul were leaving his body. He had gone to great lengths to employ Qin Tianhe's help to ensure that Heaven's Rumble Training Center would have a home in Fenglin City. He had even called in the favor the old man had owed him for so many years. But now, that youngster Feng is really pitiful. He grasped internal force at such a tender age, yet he will have to face Wang Zongquan, Qin Tianhe lamented, sighing as he stared at the monstrous, scarred man. Feng had definitely earned the title, genius, for grasping internal force, despite being in his early 20s. He had a bright future ahead of him. Controlling internal force not only helped one improve their physical control, but it also enhanced comprehension. Moreover, Feng hadn't yet reached his prime. He had plenty of room for growth. With the help of today's technology, he could gain substantial strength. With another 5 or 6 years, Feng could fight Wang Zongquan to a standstill. Meanwhile, a thin, middle-aged man watched the exchange between Fire Dance and Wang Zongquan from a corner of the room, frowning. This man was none other than Zhuolinqiu. It seems Lu Xinglua can't be underestimated. To think he would actually employ Wang Zongquan. The situation will be harder to handle now. Zhuolinqiu felt on edge as he watched the newcomer. He had thought that Lu Xinglua would at most hire an advanced internal force expert. He hadn't expected the apex internal force expert, Wang Zongquan, to show up. Experts of his caliber were extremely rare, even on a national scale. They were also particularly difficult to employ. These experts had no interest in money, they simply didn't need any. Hence, tempting them into action was a challenge. Although Zhuolinqiu was also an apex internal force expert, he was likely no match for Wang Zongquan due to his age. If it came down to a fight, Zhuolinqiu felt that he only had a 40% chance of winning. While everyone whispered to each other, Fire Dance approached the large man in the center of the hall. She calmly declared, "If you want to spar with our hall master, you'll have to get through me." A series of gasps and silence answered the young woman's declaration. Has she gone insane? Doesn't Heaven's Rumble have any capable fighters? Do they really need to send this young woman to her death? Astonished, the crowd stared at Fire Dance, who maintained her composure even after her bold statement. They wouldn't have been worried for her if she had challenged any other internal force expert, but she had just asked Wang Zongquan to spar. He wasn't kind, he was ruthless. Almost every opponent the scarred man had defeated had spent at least 6 months in a hospital bed, and that was when medical experts had been nearby during the fight. Without the money to afford the best medical services, they would have spent the rest of their lives in a hospital. What is she trying to do? Bai Qingxue began to worry as she watched her comrade. She knew that Fire Dance had trained bitterly in God's domain, and she was quite powerful. However, this was reality, not the virtual world. Even if she frequently trained in the real world, she'd be lucky to survive against ordinary martial arts experts. Trying to fight an expert of Wang Zongquan's caliber was suicidal. Is she a friend, Qingxue? Zhang Qinya asked, to which Bai Qingxue nodded. Don't worry then. Although I'm not his match, I can stop that monster for a moment if necessary, Zhang Qinya comforted his escort. He had pursued Bai Qingxue for a long time now, although he wanted more than her perfect body and pretty face. He was far more interested in the white clan group that stood behind her. Only a woman of her standards was fit to stand beside him. However, he rarely encountered an opportunity to show off his strength to her. Hence, he was quite pleased with the situation. He wasn't a match for an apex internal force expert like Wang Zongquan, but he'd have no issues stopping one of the man's attacks. Is your training center out of fighters, little lady? If you wish to spar with me, you should know that I never show mercy to my opponents. You can't blame me for the outcome. Wang Zongquan's expression darkened, and a flash of killing intent lit his eyes. He could have brushed off her interruption as youthful ignorance, but a public challenge was an entirely different matter. He was an internal force expert, a master martial artist. It was humiliating to have some random nobody challenge him. If he did not teach this girl a proper lesson, he'd become a laughingstock. The state of heaven's rumble is none of your concern. You can talk after you defeat me. Fire Dance stepped forward, and her fist shot straight toward Wang Zongquan. Chapter 2187, Defeated with One Palm. Although Fire Dance had executed her punch smoothly without making a sound, her punch seeming as natural as a passing breeze, when the various experts present saw her attacking Wang Zongquan, varying degrees of shock appeared on their faces. Is this girl insane? Chen Tianhe blurted out when he saw Fire Dance's actions. Wang Zongquan had trained his internal force to the apex. Every one of his movements was accompanied by internal force. He was different from experts that had just grasped internal force, who only used it as a trump card during critical moments. Not to mention, a sudden attack like the one Fire Dance executed would hardly be effective against a master like Wang Zongquan. If she was not careful in dealing with Wang Zongquan's inevitable counterattack, she would undoubtedly lose her life. Sure enough, Wang Zongquan did not grow flustered at all at Fire Dance's sudden attack. He calmly took half a step back, accurately moving out of her attack range. In the end, her fist did not even manage to graze his clothes. Immediately after, he counterpunched twice at Fire Dance, first at her face and then at her abdomen. Although both his punches looked identical, the one aimed at Fire Dance's abdomen was actually a little faster than the one aimed at her face. It's over. Zhang Qinya's complexion darkened when he saw this scene play out from a short distance away. Originally, he had been planning to save Fire Dance. However, he never thought that Fire Dance would be so crazy as to attack Wang Zongquan without hesitation. To make matters worse, even after seeing her attack fail, she didn't pull back immediately. Now that Wang Zongquan had counterattacked, her life was as good as gone. Although Wang Zongquan's 2 punches might look very simple to the eyes of ordinary people, they were actually extremely ruthless. A person being attacked in the face would instinctively move to defend their face. In such a situation, attacks directed to other parts of their body would be easily overlooked. Meanwhile, as an apex internal force expert, Wang Zongquan had an extremely precise grasp on timing and distance. Even well-trained internal force experts would get caught by this move of his if they were not careful, let alone a newbie without any special training like Fire Dance. Just as everyone thought that this fight was already over, however, contrary to everyone's expectations, Fire Dance actually ignored the punch aimed at her face. Instead, she suddenly sidestepped and promptly rotated her body. In the torque of her body, she then sent a lightning-fast chop straight at his neck. The sudden development in the battle caught Wang Zongquan slightly off guard. Originally, he thought that his opponent was merely an inexperienced little girl. He never expected this little girl to easily evade his attack, much less launch a counterattack of her own. However, Wang Zongquan was a hitman with many years of experience. he was fully capable of reacting to abrupt changes immediately. Although he wouldn't be able to defend against Fire Dance's attack in time, he could still dodge it. He hastily bent his body forward and leaped backward, narrowly avoiding Fire Dance's chop. Upon seeing Wang Zhongquan retreating, the spectating crowd could not help gasping in shock. Is this for real? Wang Zhongquan actually got repelled. Who is this young lady? Everyone present was aware of just how powerful Wang Zhongquan was. Even experts of the same rank would have difficulty forcing him to retreat. After all, taking the initiative to retreat in a duel meant that one was at a disadvantage. Now, however, a young lady like Fire Dance had actually made Wang Zhongquan fall back. This was simply unbelievable. Meanwhile, when Fire Dance saw Wang Zhongquan taking the initiative to retreat, she did not give chase and exploit her advantage. Instead, she simply stood in place and quietly observed him. After a short moment, she stated calmly, "You're only at this standard, I advise you to give up on challenging our hall master." When Fire Dance said these words, the spectating crowd could not help but nod in agreement. After all, if Wang Zhongquan had already fallen into a disadvantage in his fight with Fire Dance, what qualifications did he have to challenge Heaven's Rumble's hall master? Wang Zhongquan's rage shot through the roof, the intense killing intent his body radiated making everyone in the hall shudder involuntarily. In the next moment, Wang Zhongquan took a step forward, the marble floor under his feet cracking. His body then transformed into a blur as he dashed at Fire Dance like a ferocious tiger. The instant Wang Zhongquan appeared before Fire Dance, he canted his body slightly to ram his side into her. Mountain Slam. Although this ramming attack looked incredibly plain and simple, none of the experts present would dare to face this attack directly. After all, a ramming attack carried out by an ordinary internal expert could already topple a big tree. Wang Zhongquan's ramming attack could most likely send even a small car flying back. If a person were to receive this attack, all the bones in their body would shatter. Moreover, Wang Zhongquan's ramming attack was incredibly fast, so fast that many of the experts present didn't even react to it. Why must this little girl put herself in such a difficult position? Qin Tianhe sighed at this scene. Qin Tianhe had been very shocked by Fire Dance's previous performance, where she managed to not only maintain her cool, despite going up against such a powerful opponent, but even turn a dangerous situation into an opportunity to attack. She was definitely a gifted fighter. He was even tempted to take her in as a disciple. Meanwhile, had Fire Dance not provoked Wang Zhongquan further, Qin Tianhe could have forced Wang Zhongquan to leave the premises by making an appearance. After all, the fact that Wang Zhongquan had taken the initiative to retreat in a fight against a little girl, who was probably only half his age, was already humiliating enough. Insisting on continuing the fight would only further damage his reputation. However, now that Wang Zhongquan had blown his top, he wouldn't care even if he was called out for bullying the weak. Nobody could stop him now. To everyone's surprise, however, Fire Dance actually did not try to dodge Wang Zhongquan's ramming attack. On the contrary, she even took the initiative to meet him in battle. Is she crazy? Her decision shocked everyone. No one expected Fire Dance to respond so boldly. Wang Zhongquan surpassed even national-level athletes in terms of physical fitness. Only a few people in the entire country was superior to him. Trying to use brute force against him was akin to smashing an egg against a rock. Arrogant brat. When Wang Zhongquan saw Fire Dance moving to greet him in battle, a ruthless sneer appeared on his face as he further accelerated his body. A moment later, Wang Zhongquan's body crashed into Fire Dance's. However, just as everyone thought that she would go flying over 10 meters, a shocking scene occurred. Wang Zhongquan actually passed through Fire Dance. An afterimage? Zhang Qinya gaped in shock involuntarily when he saw Fire Dance's figure fading out of existence. A visual residue. Qin Tianhe immediately realized what had happened. An afterimage could be created so long as a person was moving fast enough. However, creating a visual residue did not require a person to be moving quickly, only sufficiently rapid reactions. The human mind took time to process the images the eyes saw. If one's reaction speed was sufficiently fast, they could miss perception that they were still in their original position when, in reality, they had already moved elsewhere. However, accomplishing such an action was extraordinarily difficult. This feat required one to transition from being static to dynamic motion at an extreme speed. In addition, not only did one's body have to keep up with this rapid transition, but their neural response time needed to be able to keep up as well. However, it was incredibly difficult to improve one's neural response time and impossible to do so through ordinary training. Moreover, regardless of how powerful a person became, they could improve their neural response time by only an extremely limited amount. Meanwhile, by the time Wang Zongquan reacted to the situation, Fire Dance had already moved aside and turned to face him. She then sent a palm strike at his chest, her attack looking as gentle as a falling leaf. However, the moment Fire Dance's palm collided with Wang Zongquan's body, he felt as if a hammer had just struck his chest. His face instantly turned beet red as he stumbled a few steps back before dropping down to one knee. Internal force. She's an internal force expert. Upon seeing Wang Zongquan's kneeling figure, the spectating crowd could not help but turn to stare at the completely unharmed Fire Dance in shock. Chapter 2188. Do you have an opinion? Everyone was stunned to see Wang Zongquan down on one knee. Wang Zongquan's physique completely surpassed an ordinary person's. Even the professional fighters of Fenglin City would have an extremely difficult time inflicting any external damage on him, much less internal damage. Yet, he actually sustained considerably severe internal injuries from Fire Dance's gentle palm strike. Based on his current complexion, he would most likely need half a month to recover from his injuries. This outcome was simply unbelievable. The only explanation anyone could come up with for this situation was that Fire Dance had utilized internal force. She not only grasped internal force at such a young age but also managed to injure Wang Zongquan? Could she be the disciple of some ancient aristocratic family? Chen Tianhe also could not help his astonishment as he looked at Fire Dance. Even with the help of modern technology, internal force experts were still incredibly rare. One would already be considered very talented to grasp internal force by the age of 30. Every one of such experts would become celebrities in the fighting industry. Even a top-ranking dojo like the White Tiger Dojo would treat such an expert as an honored guest. Nevertheless, Fire Dance had successfully grasped internal force at such a young age and even managed to heavily injure Wang Zongquan in one move. This was incredible. The only possibility Chen Tianhe could think of to explain this situation was that Fire Dance was the disciple of an ancient aristocratic family, since such disciples practically started training in their mother's wombs. These disciples enjoyed the best resources, legacies and teachers. As a result, they generally grasped internal force in their teens. By the time they entered their 20s, they were already strong enough to rank within the top 20 in international fighting competitions should they choose to participate. However, ancient aristocratic families generally kept a low profile and never fought for fame. Hence, the general populace did not know about these ancient aristocratic families. All the same, the influence these ancient aristocratic families held in the world was not the slightest bit weaker than that of major corporations. She's an ancient aristocratic family's disciple? Xiao Yu revealed an excited expression when he heard Chen Tianhe's words. Xiao Yu had heard a little regarding ancient aristocratic families, so he had an idea just how frightening they were. They were not existences ordinary people like himself could come into contact with. Only well-established martial arts masters like Chen Tianhe had the opportunity to do so. If Fire Dance really was an ancient aristocratic family's disciple, then the Heaven's Rumble Training Center would truly become powerful. Even the Starline Corporation would probably be helpless against it. Meanwhile, at this moment, the upper echelons of the various training centers and dojos present in the hall had lost their complacent attitude altogether. Now only shock and fear filled their minds. If even Wang Zongquan was defeated, then who in Fenglin City could possibly be a match for Fire Dance? Moreover, Fire Dance was still so young. She would definitely continue growing stronger. One could even describe her future as limitless. With such a talent present, who would dare provoke the Heaven's Rumble Training Center? After a brief round of exclamations from the spectating crowd, Wang Zongquan managed to recover slightly and slowly stand back up. Now, his eyes held only fear when he gazed at Fire Dance. I never thought that I would actually lose to a little girl like you. May I know which aristocratic family's disciple you are? Wang Zongquan asked politely, his previous arrogant attitude gone. Now he was treating Fire Dance as his equal. Wang Zongquan was far more knowledgeable than Chen Tianhe, so he knew just how powerful the disciples of aristocratic families were. The moment Fire Dance sent him stumbling back, he concluded that she was a disciple of an ancient aristocratic family. After all, everyone from the younger generation capable of surpassing him was an expert famous throughout the country. They definitely wouldn't be an unknown existence like Fire Dance. Fortunately, Fire Dance's strength and physical fitness were greatly inferior to his own. Had that previous strike been executed by an expert of equal standards, he definitely wouldn't have been able to stand back up. Fire Dance's victory was due entirely to her calm mind and frightening reaction speed. Her grasp of distance was also frighteningly accurate. Had he known that Fire Dance possessed such abilities early on, he definitely wouldn't have used such aggressive maneuvers. Instead, he would have opted for a more secure fighting style. Then he wouldn't have been defeated so decisively. However, Fire Dance was still very young. Her physical fitness could continue improving in the future. The same was true for her technical standards. Wang Zhongquan did not feel ashamed of being defeated by such a prodigy. An aristocratic family's disciple? The heartstrings of Zhang Tianya, who was standing a short distance away, quivered when he looked at Fire Dance. Both Fire Dance's appearance and body were extraordinary. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she was Zhao Yueru's equal. Moreover, Fire Dance's martial artist's temperament lent her an additional elegance that Zhao Yueru did not have. If it was indeed true that Fire Dance had the backing of an ancient aristocratic family, then she would definitely be of great help to him in the future, if he could obtain her. Aristocratic family's disciple? Fire Dance, however, was confused by Wang Zhongquan's words. She then explained, "I am not a disciple of some aristocratic family. I am only a member of the Heaven's Rumble Training Center." As soon as Fire Dance was done speaking, the entire hall fell silent momentarily. Impossible. You grasped internal force at such a young age. You also have that frightening reaction speed and a talent for combat. How can you simply be a member of a small training center? Wang Zhongquan was enraged by Fire Dance's response. If you don't want to tell me which aristocratic family you're from, just say so. Is there a need to humiliate me this way? While he could accept being defeated by Fire Dance as a martial arts master, he definitely would not accept being humiliated. Moreover, what he was truly adept at was not fighting but assassination. Outside official settings, he would have plenty of means to kill Fire Dance without anybody tracing the deed back to him. Everyone present also nodded in agreement with Wang Zhongquan's words. A member of a training center? What a joke. Even the top-ranking training centers and dojos in the country did not have the ability to produce an expert like Fire Dance. I'm telling the truth. I am not a disciple of some aristocratic family. I am only a member that has been training under our hall master all this time. I can't do anything about it even if you don't believe me, Fire Dance said, shaking her head. She gave no further explanation after that. I heard that your hall master is just in his early 20s. If you insist on trying to raise your hall master's reputation, then I have nothing else to say. However, I will firmly engrave today's matter in my heart. Wang Zhongquan was now thoroughly enraged. However, with his defeat at Fire Dance's hands, he no longer had any qualifications to challenge Heaven's Rumble's hall master. Even so, he still had many ways to destroy both the Heaven's Rumble Training Center and Fire Dance. Was there a need for this little lady to humiliate him like so? Chen Tianhe could already see that Wang Zhongquan bore killing intent toward the Heaven's Rumble Training Center and Fire Dance. The man definitely wouldn't let this matter rest. Even a fool wouldn't believe that a youth in his early 20s could nurture Fire Dance, who was of roughly similar age, into her current state. Let alone Wang Zhongquan, even Chen Tianhe would become very angry if he were in Wang Zhongquan's shoes. However, just as Wang Zhongquan was about to turn around and leave, a crisp voice echoed throughout the entire hall. I am her instructor. Do you have any opinions about it? Immediately, everyone automatically turned their heads toward the origin of the voice, and what they saw was a young man currently descending the staircase from the second floor. This young man in black was none other than Feng, who had just completed his daily training. Chapter 2189, Shocking the Audience. Everyone present inside the hall gazed at Feng in astonishment. Wang Zhongquan was no minor character. Although he had lost to Fire Dance, there was still no doubt that he was an apex internal force expert. Even the masters of top-ranking training centers and dojos had to treat him with respect. Not to mention, Wang Zhongquan had been working as a hitman for the past decade. Even if he couldn't openly cause problems for a training center or dojo, he was more than capable of doing so in secret. Is this guy tired of living? He actually dares to come out now? Does he really think Wang Zhongquan won't dare to challenge him again? What bold words! Does he actually believe he can produce an internal force expert? The many experts present looked at Feng with disdain when he appeared in the hall. They all felt that Feng was getting too full of himself. Fire Dance had just fought a dangerous battle in order to pull the Heaven's Rumble Training Center out of a crisis. All Feng needed to do was lie low and wait for Wang Zhongquan to leave. He simply had to be tired of living to reveal himself now. Old Xiao, is this the young man you were talking about? Chen Tianhe shook his head as he looked at Feng. He's far too immature and arrogant. Although he has the support of an aristocratic family's disciple, he still shouldn't have provoked Wang Zhongquan like this. Although Wang Zhongquan could not afford to run afoul of ancient aristocratic families, he would have no problems killing the other members of the Heaven's Rumble Training Center. He could also make it so that the deed couldn't be traced back to him. Even though Feng had already grasped internal force, it wouldn't change his fate. After all, according to the rumors Chen Tianhe had heard, more than 10 internal force experts had fallen at Wang Zhongquan's hands, including apex internal force experts. So he's Feng? Zhang Qinya could not help but reveal some envy as he eyed Feng. An aristocratic family's disciple. The status of every one of these disciples was not the slightest bit inferior to that of an heir of a major corporation. They were existences that even someone like Wang Zhongquan had to show respect to. Yet, despite having ordinary looks and an average family background, Feng actually managed to gain Fire Dance's favor and even her support. How could Zhang Qinya not envy him? In fact, Zhang Qinya believed there was an 80% chance that Feng's success in becoming an internal force expert was due to Fire Dance's help. After all, the legacies and resources that ancient aristocratic families possessed were far superior to those of top-ranking training centers and dojos. So long as one possessed even the slightest amount of talent, they would have no problem becoming an internal force expert. If Zhang Qinya had obtained these resources, he would have most likely become an expert on Wang Zhongquan's level by now. Meanwhile, during the time the spectating crowd was quietly discussing Feng had arrived at the center of the hall. Fire Dance promptly took the initiative to stand behind him as if she really was just a member of the Heaven's Rumble Training Center. This scene immediately provoked the envy of many of the spectating experts. Crap. What kind of luck does that kid possess to earn the favor of that goddess? What a lucky bastard. With an aristocratic family backing him, even Wang Zhongquan can't do anything against him on the surface. That's right. If we could sponge off such a goddess as well, even setting up a top-ranking training center wouldn't be a problem. Many of the men present derided Feng, and as if they were afraid Feng could not hear them, their voices grew steadily louder as they spoke. To most of the experts present, being able to grasp internal force was already a matter worth rejoicing. As for setting up their own training center in a first-tier city and developing it into a top-ranking training center, that was something that they didn't even dream of. However, if they had the help of an aristocratic family's disciple, then such a feat would be a piece of cake. Now that Feng had Fire Dance's support, his becoming one of Fenglin City's powerhouses was almost guaranteed. Fenglin City's fighting industry might even have to adhere to his wishes in the future. Other top-ranking training centers and dojos also wouldn't dare to act against him rashly. Meanwhile, seated in a corner of the hall was Zhuolinqiu, who was quietly observing the event. So that's the case. It's no wonder Zero Wing is confident of establishing itself in Fenglin City, Zhuolinqiu thought to himself as he observed Fire Dance, disregarding Feng entirely. With this, Zero Wing indeed merits the young master's attention. As the butler of the Five States Corporation's heir and an apex internal force expert himself, Zhuolinqiu knew a lot more regarding ancient aristocratic families than Chen Tianhe and Wang Zhongquan did, so he understood just how valuable the support of an aristocratic family's disciple was. During the time everyone was discussing Feng, Wang Zhongquan had also arrived before him, his gaze filled with disdain and anger as he glared at the young man. "And here I thought you wouldn't have the courage to show yourself," Wang Zhongquan sneered. "Since you're here, do you dare exchange a few moves with me? I want to see whether you truly are capable of instructing such an excellent member or not, Hall Master Shi." Originally, Wang Zhongquan thought that he would not have a chance to reclaim the reputation he had lost due to Fire Dance today. However, since Feng had taken the initiative to appear before him, This was the perfect opportunity for him to do so and fulfill his agreement with Lu Xinglua to wreck the Heaven's Rumble Training Center's reputation, killing two birds with one stone. He naturally couldn't miss this opportunity. That won't be a problem. Only, Master Wang, you were just injured. Do you need a few days to recover? It won't be too late to spar at that time, Feng said. No need. It is only a minor injury. I wish to experience Hall Master Shi's brilliant moves now. Wang Zongquan said. He launched an attack at Feng without hesitation, not giving him any more time to speak. In Wang Zongquan's opinion, Feng was simply trying to find an excuse to buy time and eventually let the matter be forgotten. He naturally couldn't let Feng have his way. Meanwhile, the best method to get Feng to take action was to leave the man with no choice but to take action. The spectating crowd shook their heads and sneered at Feng. That guy is so dumb. Did he really think Wang Zongquan would let such a great opportunity slip by? Ah, he's going to make a fool of himself now. He's just a brat who has just learned internal force. Does he actually think an apex internal force expert like Wang Zongquan will be afraid of him because of a little injury? How foolish. Does he believe he can run rampant just because he has the backing of an aristocratic family's disciple? Everyone understood that Feng was planning to get Wang Zongquan to give up on today's match with the excuse that Wang Zongquan was injured. Unfortunately, how could someone of Wang Zongquan's caliber not see through his ploy? Moreover, the spectating experts could also see very clearly that, although Fire Dance had defeated Wang Zongquan, she should have grasped internal force only recently. Her physique was also far inferior to his. Although she had indeed managed to injure Wang Zongquan, he should still be able to exhibit 80% of his normal standard, which would be sufficient for him to beat up a basic internal force expert. In the next moment, however, Wang Zongquan's fast and powerful fist suddenly came to an abrupt halt before Feng's face, unable to move forward by even the slightest. How is this possible? Wang Zongquan stared at his wrist, which Feng was gripping tightly, in extreme confusion. Wang Zongquan had given his all in that punch. Despite his injury, his full-powered punch still wasn't something a basic internal force expert could block directly. In his opinion, Feng should have chosen to dodge or deflect his attack. However, Feng had actually used one of the most impossible to execute methods to stop his attack, grabbing his wrist. Before Wang Zongquan could shake off Feng's hold, Feng suddenly tightened his grip and swung Wang Zongquan's arm as if he was swinging a sword. Immediately, Wang Zongquan felt himself getting yanked off his feet, then propelled through the air. For a moment, the surrounding crowd even felt a strong wind blowing past their faces. Soon after, a loud boom entered everyone's ears as the floor beneath them shook slightly. By the time everyone realized what was going on, Wang Zongquan was already lying unconscious on the floor some distance away from Feng. The marble beneath him cracked. Chapter 2190, He is a Grandmaster. Upon seeing Wang Zongquan's body lying motionless on the cracked marble floor, the spectating crowd froze, and a deathly silence fell over the entire hall. A short moment later. How is this possible? This is a lie, right? Wang Zongquan actually got defeated just like that? Who is this Feng? The spectating experts simply couldn't believe their eyes as they gazed at the unconscious Wang Zongquan. This was an apex internal force expert they were talking about. Wang Zongquan stood at the apex of Fenglin city, yet now he was actually defeated effortlessly by an ordinary youngster who did not give off even the slightest hint of an aura. The exchange between Feng and Wang Zongquan had been so decisive that it couldn't even be considered a fight. It was practically a drubbing. So many of the experts here reacted with fear toward Wang Zongquan before, so shouldn't he be very strong? Why did he get defeated so easily? Could Heaven's Rumble have paid Wang Zongquan to stage an act? I'm guessing that's most likely the case. Wang Zongquan is an internal force expert. On the other hand, that Feng is so young. Even if he is powerful, how powerful could he possibly be? Moreover, the fact that someone like Wang Zongquan even appeared here is very strange to begin with. Heaven's Rumble must have hired Wang Zongquan to pretend to fight to raise its fame. Unlike the experts in the hall, the spectating fighting enthusiasts felt that Wang Zongquan had acted out a play when they saw him so easily defeated. After all, when Wang Zongquan was fighting Fire Dance earlier, they could more or less tell how powerful he was. However, when Wang Zhongquan fought Shi Feng from start to end, they hadn't seen any hint of that power Wang Zhongquan had displayed before. They felt that Wang Zhongquan had deliberately coordinated his movements with Shi Feng, jumping into the air the moment Shi Feng grabbed his wrist and letting Shi Feng freely throw him. The fight could not be any faker. At this moment, aside from the fighting enthusiasts, the training center and dojo members present also found this fight fake. The strength and internal force expert wielded far surpassed that of ordinary people. If Wang Zhongquan had thrown his punch with his full strength, even an internal force expert couldn't have stopped his punch by grabbing his wrist. A fake match? At this moment, even Xiaoyu was dumbfounded by this scene. However, he instinctively refuted the possibility, as he had never heard about such plans from Shi Feng earlier. Moreover, the Starling Corporation had been keeping an eye on the Heaven's Rumble Training Center. Only an existence like the Starling Corporation could employ the services of someone like Wang Zhongquan. Most importantly, why would an apex internal force expert agree to min his own reputation just to uplift the Heaven's Rumble Training Center's reputation? As Xiaoyu was wondering why Wang Zhongquan would put on a fake fight, Chen Tianhe, who stood beside Xiaoyu, suddenly revealed a look of horror. Neutralizing. He is a neutralizing Grandmaster. Chen Tianhe muttered quietly as he stared at Shi Feng, his complexion paling as if he had just seen a ghost. Neutralizing Grandmaster? Xiaoyu momentarily fell into a daze when he heard Chen Tianhe's words. Compelled to seek confirmation, he asked, Master Chen, you're saying that Shi Feng is a neutralizing Grandmaster? In the fighting industry, those capable of grasping internal force were considered absolute experts. Less than 0.1% of professional fighters would ever succeed in grasping internal force. For those that did, their understanding and usage of their body and strength would far surpass those of ordinary people. No matter where these experts went, they would have the qualifications to establish a training center or dojo and accept disciples. Hence, internal force experts were labeled masters. However, above internal force experts, there were still neutralizing experts. Ordinary people would already be fortunate to come across an internal force expert. As for neutralizing experts, most ordinary people would most likely never meet one. Every neutralizing expert was a titan in the fighting industry. They were people who could contest for first place in international fighting competitions. The fame and status they enjoyed were far superior to those of people like Chen Tianhe and Wang Zhongquan. If one were to draw a comparison between internal force experts and neutralizing experts, the former would be candlelight while the latter would be the blazing sun. It is possible, Chen Tianhe said hesitantly. Only, since when has there ever been such a young neutralizing Grandmaster in this world? Even the ancient aristocratic families are incapable of producing a neutralizing Grandmaster this young. Ordinary people most likely wouldn't find anything special about Shi Feng's grabbing and throwing motions. In fact, most of the professional fighters present wouldn't. However, Chen Tianhe, who had already mastered internal force to the apex, could tell just how frightening Shi Feng's usage of his body and strength was. First, upon grabbing Wang Zhongquan's wrist, Shi Feng had immediately redirected and nullified the force in Wang Zhongquan's arm. Then, when Wang Zhongquan put more strength into his arm to break free of Shi Feng's hold, Shi Feng made use of Wang Zhongquan's strength and coupled it with his own to lift and throw Wang Zhongquan to the ground. Although this series of actions appeared very simple, executing it within a mere instant was exceedingly difficult. Only neutralizing Grandmasters who could push their muscles to the limit could accomplish such a feat. What made Chen Tianhe doubt his conclusion was that Shi Feng was simply too young. Even now, Chen Tianhe was considered one of the top-ranking experts in the country. He had also been famous for a long time already. In his many years mingling in the fighting industry, he had come across plenty of internal force experts of varying standards and even neutralizing Grandmasters. However, despite his extensive experience, he had never even heard of a neutralizing Grandmaster who was in his 20s. At this moment, aside from Chen Tianhe, Master Yang from the Extreme Light Dojo, Zhang Tianya, and the other internal force experts present were similarly gazing at Shi Feng in astonishment and horror. Impossible. How can he be a neutralizing Grandmaster? Zhang Tianya blurted out in shock. Ordinary people might have failed to discern the intricacies of Wang Zhongquan's fight with Shi Feng, but internal force experts like Zhang Tianya managed to roughly discern its crucial parts. In most people's eyes, Wang Zhongquan's fight did indeed look like an act. However, this was because Shi Feng's usage of his strength was too ingenious. He was already at the stage of simplifying complex movements. Hence, his fight with Wang Zhongquan looked very fake. A neutralizing Grandmaster? Feng is actually this powerful. Zhao Yueru could not help growing excited when she heard Zhang Tianya's words. Although she did not have a clear concept of what a neutralizing Grandmaster was, she still understood how powerful Grandmaster martial artists were. They were supreme existences within the country, experts that even the various top-ranking dojos and training centers feared greatly. Meanwhile, when Gentle Snow saw the exchange between Feng and Wang Zhongquan, she felt an indescribable sense of shock and familiarity. This was because she could tell that Feng's usage of his strength and body very closely resembled the principles of the refinement realm and truth realm. It was as if he had just merged these two concepts and demonstrated them. Only this should be a technique that existed only in God's domain. Now, however, he had actually displayed it in the real world. As for Zhuolinqiu, who sat in a corner of the hall, he was gaping in shock at Feng. Zhuolinqiu had never imagined that Feng was such a powerful expert. He was actually telling the truth. Although an aristocratic family's disciple would indeed daunt an apex internal force expert like Zhuolinqiu, this would not deter him from taking action against one. However, a neutralizing Grandmaster was a different story. It was no exaggeration to describe a neutralizing Grandmaster as superhuman. Compared to Feng's identity as a neutralizing Grandmaster, Fire Dance's identity as an aristocratic family's disciple was utterly insignificant. Neutralizing Grandmasters were existences that even major corporations had to show respect to, because these people held massive influence in the fighting industry. Moreover, there were times when major corporations also needed the help of these experts. After all, the various major corporations' upper echelons were frequent targets for assassination. Only with the protection of a neutralizing Grandmaster would one be able to guarantee their safety. At this moment, the various internal force experts present finally understood that Feng had not been lying before. Fire Dance's achievement could very well have been thanks to Feng's guidance. After all, it wasn't impossible for a neutralizing Grandmaster to nurture an internal force expert. In fact, there were many precedents. During the time everyone was quietly discussing this situation, Wang Zhongquan had regained consciousness. However, when he came to, his mind was a huge blur and his body ached all over. He could tell that he had several broken bones. He would need more than a month to recover fully from such injuries. Well, Master Wang, do you still wish to continue sparring? Feng asked as he watched Wang Zhongquan struggle to his feet. Chapter 2191, Fame Spreads in Fenglin City. When Wang Zhongquan saw the faint smile on Feng's face, a chill suddenly swept through him, his body shuddering involuntarily. No need to continue. I admit defeat. Wang Zhongquan said hurriedly, afraid that he would be executed if he delayed his answer by even the slightest bit. Although he had clashed with Feng for only a very brief moment, he understood more clearly than anybody else present just how frightening Feng was. It was no exaggeration to say that if Feng had wanted to, he definitely could have consigned Wang Zhongquan to eternal rest with that previous move. Now, when Wang Zhongquan looked at Feng, he felt that he was seeing a humanoid demon. Aside from this conclusion, he could not think of any other possibility. After all, despite having wandered the entire world, he had never heard of anyone becoming a neutralizing Grandmaster in their early 20s. Moreover, unlike other people, Wang Zhongquan had personally clashed with neutralizing Grandmasters before, so he knew full well just how frightening in existence they were. Neutralizing Grandmasters could no longer be considered human, they were superhuman. Even ordinary firearms were useless against neutralizing Grandmasters, as Grandmasters could preemptively take evasive maneuvers by relying on their extraordinary senses. Meanwhile, before a neutralizing Grandmaster, apex internal force experts like Wang Zhongquan were akin to little children. Their life and death were no longer within their control. At this moment, Wang Zhongquan started to feel animosity for Lu Xingluo. Had he known that Feng was a neutralizing Grandmaster, with even 10 times his courage, he still wouldn't have dared to kick up a ruckus at the Heaven's Rumble Training Center. Since we have solved your concerns, then we can discuss the matter of you coming here to cause a commotion, Master Wang, Feng said. As soon as Feng was done speaking, Wang Zhongquan's complexion turned ashen. Even top-ranking training centers and dojos could not bear the wrath of a neutralizing Grandmaster. The fate of a lone apex internal force expert like himself went without saying. Not to mention he was currently right in front of Feng. He couldn't run away even if he wanted to now. Hall Master Shi, just state however much compensation you want. I'll pay it so long as I have it, Wang Zongquan said with great anxiety. Right, I just received 6 bottles of the Green God Company's life potion. Let's add them to the compensation as well. Neutralizing Grandmasters were different from the average person. The amount of nutrients their bodies required daily far exceeded the average person's. Moreover, if they wanted to improve their physical fitness further, consuming ordinary food and nutrient fluids would no longer suffice. At the very least, they needed S-rank nutrient fluids. Meanwhile, the life potion was something even more valuable than S-rank nutrient fluids. In fact, these 6 life potions were the reason why Wang Zongquan had agreed to undertake Lu Xinglua's request. After all, life potions were extremely difficult to come by. Even neutralizing Grandmasters could get their hands on only a small amount. 6 life potions? Feng could not help but be moved. He had never expected Wang Zongquan to possess life potions, the Green God Company's latest creation. Feng naturally understood what was going through Wang Zongquan's mind right now. After all, Feng had had the fortune to meet a neutralizing Grandmaster in his previous life, so he knew that these Grandmasters were truly superhuman. He also knew that their nutritional requirements were different from the ordinary person's. Only Feng wasn't actually a neutralizing Grandmaster yet. He had merely touched upon the realm after combining the principles of the Truth Realm and Refinement Realm. In God's domain, every player's body had long since reached an extraordinary level. Hence, players could exhibit the principles of the realms of truth and realms of refinement to their greatest limits. The human body in the real world was very weak in comparison, making it impossible for people to fully exhibit the strength of these 2 realms in the real world. This was akin to running state-of-the-art software on an ancient computer. The hardware simply couldn't support the software at all, and the computer would crash when trying to run the application. The reason why Feng was able to apply the principles of the Truth Realm and Refinement Realm in the real world was mainly his having reached the Ascension Realm and Domain Realm in God's domain. Even so, he had already sustained some minor internal injuries from executing that one move. He still needed to improve his physical fitness further before he could reliably display the principles of the Truth Realm and Refinement Realm in the real world. Meanwhile, the life potion was something Feng had only heard of during his previous life. He had never actually seen one before, much less consumed one. The life potion was not sold to the public. It was many times more valuable than even S-rank nutrient fluids. Although the life potion couldn't resurrect the dead, it could cure all internal injuries and strengthen the user's physique. It was even rumored that long-term consumption of the life potion could rejuvenate the user. Moreover, these were still not the most important point about the life potion. The truly amazing aspect of the life potion was its ability to invigorate a person's brain cells, making cerebral development easier. Due to these reasons, after God's domain had spread its influence throughout the entire world, the life potion became something all powers fervently competed over. Those powers that managed to secure themselves a stable supply of life potions had been able to nurture a batch of peak experts and apex experts quickly. Feng found Wang Zongquan's possession of 6 life potions simply unbelievable. However, Wang Zongquan misconstrued Feng's comment as a complaint that this amount was too little. He hurriedly explained, "Hall Master Shi, this is really all that I have. However, I heard that 9-State City is about to hold an internal auction and that life potions will be sold there. Here is the invitation card I received. Aside from this, I really don't have any more life potions." Feng could tell that Wang Zongquan was not lying. He also understood that it was already plenty amazing for someone like Wang Zongquan to obtain 6 life potions. After all, ordinary martial arts masters couldn't get their hands on even 1 bottle, let alone 6. Fine. We'll forget about monetary compensation, but I need you to help me with a matter, Feng said, nodding as he accepted the invitation. Wang Zongquan inwardly breathed out a sigh of relief at Feng's words. He then said confidently, "Hall Master Shi, please speak freely. As long as it is something I can accomplish, I'll definitely do it. It's very simple. I want you to go teach Lu Xinglua a lesson," Feng said, smiling as he patted Wang Zongquan's shoulder. Since Lu Xinglua had already taken the initiative to make trouble for him, Feng naturally had to respond in kind. Although Feng was currently slightly stronger than Wang Zongquan, he was quite inferior to the professional hitman when it came to dealing with people outside of an official competition. If he tried to take action against Lu Xinglua, his actions would no doubt get exposed very quickly. Not to mention Feng didn't have that much free time to take part in such matters. He had his hands full dealing with Zero Wing. Wang Zongquan could not help being shocked by Feng's request. Hall Master Lu Xinglua is the Starline Corporation's heir. If I do so. Since that is the case, let's continue discussing the commotion you've caused. Feng said, his voice taking on a chill. If not for Feng having improved sufficiently quickly and displaying absolute strength against Wang Zongquan would have definitely continued trying to make trouble for the Heaven's Rumble Training Center even after suffering defeat at Fire Dance's hands. Hence, Feng naturally couldn't let him off the hook too easily. Feng did not doubt Wang Zongquan's ability to meet his demand in the slightest. As for the consequences for Wang Zongquan after carrying out this feat, this was not something Feng cared about. I'll do it. I'll make sure Hall Master won't be disappointed. Wang Zongquan assured hurriedly while nodding after sensing a trace of killing intent from Feng. Wang Zongquan had an instinctive fear of neutralizing Grandmasters stemming from his understanding of their power. So long Feng wanted to, unless Wang Zongquan fled to the ends of the world, he wouldn't be able to escape Feng. Compared to earning Feng's ire, provoking a major corporation's heir held much lighter consequences. Not to mention Feng had only told him to teach Lu Xinglua a lesson, not to kill the man. If Wang Zongquan limited his actions, the Starline Corporation wouldn't go all out in dealing with him. In fact, the corporation would avoid making a huge fuss about this. After all, if news of this matter were to leak to the public, the Starline Corporation would become a laughingstock for its rivals. Moreover, Wang Zongquan was originally already furious at Lu Xinglua for sending him to pick a fight with a neutralizing Grandmaster. He could use this opportunity to get some payback as well. Upon seeing Wang Zongquan leave the Heaven's Rumble Training Center dejectedly, the upper echelons of the various training centers and dojos present promptly went to Feng and Xiaoyu to congratulate them. They even sent the Heaven's Rumble Training Center huge gifts. These training centers and dojos no longer entertained any thoughts of causing trouble for Heaven's Rumble. In fact, they even showed signs of submitting themselves to Heaven's Rumble, a scene that stupefied the fighting enthusiasts in the hall, who all wondered what kind of background the Heaven's Rumble Training Center possessed. News of this matter quickly spread throughout Fenglin City. Chapter 2192, Seizing Fenglin City. After Wang Zongquan's departure, many of the training center and dojo members present were tempted to join the Heaven's Rumble Training Center. The various fighting enthusiasts present, on the other hand, immediately started applying to join Heaven's Rumble. Previously, everyone thought that the Heaven's Rumble Training Center was a sham. However, after seeing Feng, Heaven's Rumble's Hall Master, defeat Wang Zongquan easily and overhearing the comments of the various internal force experts present stating that Feng was a Grandmaster martial artist, they realized that Heaven's Rumble possessed genuine ability that was far superior to that of the other training centers and dojos in Fenglin City. Moreover, Heaven's Rumble was equipped with state-of-the-art training and medical facilities. Just these points alone already held a great temptation for the various fighting enthusiasts. After just a few hours, the Heaven's Rumble Training Center had gained more than 5,000 members already. As for becoming a disciple of Heaven's Rumble, not everyone could do so since Feng had set certain requirements. The Heaven's Rumble Training Center's main purpose wasn't to generate profits. It would serve as a talent pool for Zero Wing to recruit from. Hence, ordinary people couldn't become disciples of the training center. Moreover, the disciples of training centers and dojos generally enjoyed much better treatment than ordinary members. They would be taught things that were not shared with the public. The recruitment requirements for disciples naturally had to be strict. Even so, after half a day of testing, Heaven's Rumble still managed to recruit more than 200 disciples. This situation excited Xiaoyu greatly. Despite having managed the Big Dipper Training Center for many years now, he had never seen so many people joining a training center on the day of its grand opening. Moreover, this was only the beginning. As Heaven's Rumble's name spread, even more people would join. Afterward, so long as Heaven's Rumble managed to nurture some disciples that achieved high rankings in Fenglin City's annual fighting competition, the Heaven's Rumble Training Center could easily become the head of Fenglin City's fighting industry. As the Heaven's Rumble Training Center bustled with activity, Zhuolinqiu suddenly approached Feng. Zhuolinqiu's appearance had been completely silent. Most of the people inside the hall had overlooked his existence. Only a small number of internal force experts had managed to notice him. What a powerful person. His strength is most likely on par with Wang Zongquan's, Qin Tianhe exclaimed in his heart when he saw Zhuolinqiu approaching Feng. Wang Zongquan had an overbearing and explicit aura. On the other hand, Zhuolinqiu gave off a sense of emptiness and restraint. The two of them were polar opposites of each other. If an ordinary person were to compare the two of them, they would definitely judge Wang Zongquan to be stronger. However, those who had trained to Qin Tianhe's standards no longer judged people's strength based on aura alone. Moreover, concealing one's aura was much more difficult than simply letting it run wild. This was also a technique Qin Tianhe had been studying for quite some time now. Unfortunately, he had just barely scratched the surface of the technique thus far and was definitely inferior to Zhuolinqiu. One could say that, in terms of technique and spirit, Zhuolinqiu was above Wang Zongquan. Zhuolinqiu. Why is he here? Zhang Tianya was stunned when he saw Zhuolinqiu. Unlike Qin Tianhe, Zhang Tianya was not only an internal force expert but also the heir of one of Fenglin City's top 5 financial groups. Zhuolinqiu had once visited Fenglin City. Back then, the various financial groups of Fenglin City had promptly gathered to welcome him to the city. Moreover, the leaders of every financial group, including the Zhang clan group, had been present during this gathering. These leaders all treated Zhuolinqiu with great respect. As for Zhang Tianya, as he was part of the younger generation, he could only watch the gathering of VIPs from the sidelines. Zhuolinqiu was someone who was only half a step away from becoming a neutralizing Grandmaster. Unfortunately, due to his advanced age, his physique could no longer keep up with his mind. As a result, he could never cross the final threshold and remained stuck at the apex of the internal force realm. Whether it was in terms of status or strength, Zhuolinqiu was an existence that Zhang Tianya could only look at in awe. Now, however, Zhuolinqiu was actually taking the initiative to greet Feng. During the time Qin Tianhe and Zhang Tianya were wondering about Zhuolinqiu's purpose here, Zhuolinqiu arrived before Feng. Hallmaster Shi, are you free for a private chat? Zhuolinqiu asked in a low tone. At this moment, Zhuolinqiu no longer viewed Feng with contempt. On the contrary, he now looked at the youth with a trace of fear and respect. Neutralizing Grandmasters were existences beyond the circle of ordinary internal force experts. However, as the butler of the Five States Corporation's heir, Zhuolinqiu was quite familiar with the existence of neutralizing Grandmasters, so he knew intimately how powerful they were. Even major corporations would not dare slight neutralizing Grandmasters. Sure, let's head upstairs, Feng said, nodding. He had long since known about Zhuolinqiu's arrival in the Heaven's Rumble Training Center as well as the man's purpose for visiting. He also knew about Han Feng's determination to invest in God's domain. Meanwhile, with how successful Zero Wing currently was in God's domain, the temptation it held for Han Feng went without saying. Given these two things, it was obvious that Han Feng was waiting for an opportune moment to make Zero Wing an offer it could not refuse. Only Zero Wing's strength surpassed Han Feng's expectations. Now, even Starlink could not make short work of Zero Wing and could only pursue a war of attrition. After today's performance, it would be very normal for Han Feng to grow impatient and take action immediately. Feng led Zhuolinqiu to the top-floor reception room, leaving the training center's matters to Xiaoyu, Fire Dance, and Bai Qingxue to manage. How is this possible? Zhang Tianya gaped in shock at the respectful attitude Zhuolinqiu showed Feng. Zhang Tianya could tell that Bai Qingxue and Feng's relationship was not simple at all. Otherwise, Bai Qingxue wouldn't have invited him to help the Heaven's Rumble Training Center. Previously, although Zhang Tianya felt that Feng's strength as a neutralizing Grandmaster was indeed amazing, he did not consider himself inferior to Feng. After all, he was still young. He was also one of Fenglin City's top fighting prodigies. He still had plenty of room for improvement and a chance to become a neutralizing Grandmaster himself in the future. Moreover, he also had the Zhang clan group behind him. Even though Feng currently had his identity as a neutralizing Grandmaster, he would still need at least a decade to develop the Heaven's Rumble Training Center to a level that rivaled the Zhang clan group. Now, however, even Zhang Tianya's sole redeeming feature appeared laughable. The only person capable of commanding Zhuolinqiu to pay someone a personal visit was Han Feng, the heir of the Five States Corporation. This meant that Han Feng was trying to make contact with Feng. If Feng had Han Feng's backing, then getting the Heaven's Rumble Training Center to surpass the Zhang clan group would truly be a piece of cake. Inside the Heaven's Rumble Training Center's top-floor reception room. Mr. Zhua, may I know what business you have with me? Feng asked as he sat down. I am here to relay a message from my young master, Hall Master Shi. Starlink is not as simple as you think it is. Lu Xinglua is receiving guidance from someone higher. Sending Wang Zongquan to Heaven's Rumble this time was merely a test. Once Lu Xinglua has a clear idea of the Heaven's Rumble Training Center, I'm afraid he and the person behind him will take serious action. My young master advises you to be extra careful against Lu Xinglua, Zhuolinqiu said gravely. The strength Shi Feng displayed this time was indeed frightening. Even an existence like the Starling Corporation would not wish to provoke a neutralizing Grandmaster casually. However, with Zero Wing standing in Starlink's way and forming quite an enmity with Starlink, it did not matter even if the Heaven's Rumble Training Center had the backing of a neutralizing Grandmaster. The Starling Corporation still had plenty of ways to destroy the training center in secret. Moreover, even if the Starling Corporation couldn't touch Shi Feng himself, it could still deal with the other members of Zero Wing. Please give my thanks to young Master Han for his reminder. I'll make sure to be more careful from now on. If young Master Han needs any help in God's domain, please feel free to seek out Zero Wing, Shi Feng said. He understood that Han Feng was trying to sell him a favor this time. Moreover, Han Feng was also finally treating him as a potential partner rather than another pawn or subordinate. I will relay this to my young master. If there are no other matters, I will take my leave now, Zhuolinqiu said as he stood up, showing no intention of staying even a moment longer. After Zhuolinqiu left, Shi Feng sank into deep thought. Although his strength had already improved by a significant margin and many of the dangers he would normally have to worry about were no longer a concern, just like Han Feng said, the various major corporations were not as simple as they made themselves out to be. The Starling Corporation would have no difficulty dealing with both the Heaven's Rumble Training Center and Zero Wing from the shadows. It seems I have to improve my strength quickly, nurture more experts, and develop my power in Fenglin City. Shi Feng understood that even though the Starling Corporation seemed helpless against the current Zero Wing, if it took covert action, Zero Wing would be helpless to do anything about it. The only way to avoid such an outcome was to increase Zero Wing's status and influence in the real world. Afterward, Shi Feng took out one of the life potions which Wang Zongquan had someone secretly delivered to him. He admired the icy blue liquid contained inside the glass bottle, then popped the cap and drank the liquid. He needed to improve his own physique first above all else. Chapter 2193, Life Potion's Effects. The instant Shi Feng consumed the life potion, a cool sensation spread across his entire body. Shortly after, his body started heating up as if all its cells had just gained new life. Amazing. My injured muscles recovered significantly as soon as I drank it. With this, I'll be completely healed in less than half an hour. Shi Feng was shocked to feel his injuries healing at a rapid pace. The injuries he sustained from overexerting his muscles had been severe and would have taken at least 2 or 3 days to fully recover even with the help of the most advanced medical facilities in the world. Now, however, he would need only half an hour to make a full recovery. The life potion's effects were truly divine. Moreover, aside from it healing his injuries, Shi Feng could also sense it starting to invigorate and strengthen his body's cells. By the time his body completely absorbed the life potion, his physical fitness would have definitely improved by quite a significant margin. It's no wonder life potions sold for such ridiculous prices in the past. With my current condition, if I use this long term, I'll gain the physical fitness of an actual Grandmaster within 2 months, Shi Feng thought to himself, a passionate flame burning in his eyes as he gazed at the 5 remaining bottles of life potion on the table. Recently, his physical fitness had hit a bottleneck. Despite a greater training load, his gains were negligible. He would have to train for a very long time to see any noticeable improvements. If he wished to improve his strength quickly, the only way to do so was by becoming a neutralizing Grandmaster. Neutralizing Grandmasters were known as such because their control over their bodies had already reached the acme of perfection. This was especially true for their control over their brains, which allowed Grandmasters to accelerate their hormone production and metabolism, thereby further improving the body's performance. Meanwhile, the life potion would help him break through this bottleneck and further improve his physical fitness by a significant margin. However, each bottle of life potion was effective for only 6 days. Even if he used all 6 bottles himself, they would last him only 36 days. He would need a few more bottles to reach the Grandmaster standard. So long as his physical fitness was at the Grandmaster standard, even if his control was still wanting, he would be able to exchange moves with a true neutralizing Grandmaster. An hour later, seeing as it was close to 6 in the evening already, which meant that daytime was approaching in God's domain, Feng decided to make his way back to Zero Wing's headquarters and further strengthen the headquarters' security. Indeed, just like Zhuo Linqiu had said, it was very likely that Lu Xinglua had sent Wang Zhongquan just to probe the situation on Zero Wing's side. Once Lu Xinglua and the ones behind him were done with their investigation, they would most likely start taking action in secret. Hence, he needed to strengthen Zero Wing's security measures and its core members. Originally, Feng had planned to let Fire Dance and the others use the life potion as well. However, on second thought he decided against it. Although the life potion was useful to everyone, using it on ordinary people and basic internal force experts was too much of a waste because the physical fitness of these people was still far from hitting a bottleneck. They had many other means to improve themselves rapidly. Moreover, through the experiment Feng had conducted using Wang Zhongquan, he had confirmed that one could improve one's strength in the real world by reaching the refinement realm and truth realm in God's domain. By combining the principles of these two realms with his guidance and training, Fire Dance and the others could contend against internal force experts, even if they had yet to grasp internal force. If one possessed such combat standards in the real world, they could cope with many troublesome matters in the real world. Once he trained Zero Wing's core members to an adequate level, all they needed to do was participate in various fighting competitions and achieve stunning results. Once that happened, the Heavens Rumble Training Center's status and influence in Fenglin City would increase drastically, and the training center would become the true leader of the city's fighting industry. At that time, even if Lu Xinglua wanted to, he would have great difficulty hindering Zero Wing's operations in the city. Meanwhile, to achieve this goal of his, Feng intended to prepare the Lost Town to receive more of Zero Wing's members immediately instead of limiting access to just the guild's main force. Having more members reach the Truth Realm would greatly bolster Zero Wing's strength and increase its ability to cope with the various superpowers of God's domain. After all, now that Stone Forest City was achieving such enormous success, the superpowers definitely wouldn't just sit still and let it be. After Feng finished updating the security measures in Zero Wing's headquarters, he logged back into God's domain. When Feng appeared back inside his special forging room in the candlelight trading firm, he suddenly felt his mind was more unrestrained than before, as if it had more scope for processing things now. So, this is the effect of the life potion? Feng could not help but be surprised. With his current state, he felt that he could learn even a silver combat technique. Previously, although he had obtained a silver legacy stone tablet, he had yet to use it even now because he already difficulty learning bronze combat techniques, let alone silver combat techniques. Even domain realm experts would have a very low likelihood of mastering one. The reason why this was the case wasn't a deficiency in combat standards but two other issues. The first issue was an inadequate physique. Executing a silver combat technique required a physique at the Tier 3 standard at minimum. The second issue was an insufficient brain capacity. Silver combat techniques were extremely complex. If one's brain was not sufficiently active, it would not be able to process the complex actions required to execute the technique. Of course, this problem could be solved so long as one continuously improved their physique in God's domain. However, a Tier 2 physique was still far from the point where it could lower the mental difficulty of learning a silver combat technique. During the time Feng was researching the benefits of the life potion, Aqua Rose suddenly called him. "Guild leader, I have 2 people here who say they want to meet you," Aqua Rose said. "Both of them are here on someone else's behalf. They say it's related to an agreement you have with the Midnight Tea Party's vice commander, Endless Scars." Endless Scars. Nodding, Feng said, "All right, I'll head over right away." Endless Scars had previously sought his help with a matter, and he had agreed to help her out in his personal capacity. However, there had been no word from her after that, so he had gotten the impression that the woman had already forgotten about their agreement. He never thought that she would contact him now. However, an agreement was an agreement. Since Endless Scars had sent someone to contact him, he naturally had to go meet with these representatives. He took out a guild transfer scroll and teleported back to the White River City Guild residence. Inside the top-floor reception room of Zero Wing's residence in White River City, Aside from Aqua Rose, there were currently two other people, a man and a woman, in the reception room. Both looked to be around 30 years old. Although the man had a gaunt frame, he gave the impression of a wild wolf. The aura he radiated was sharp and unruly in nature. As for the woman, her appearance was not the slightest bit inferior to Aqua Rose's, only more mature. She also radiated the aura of a predator. Burning, what do you think is going through Scar's mind? She's actually wasting a slot on Black Flame, the other woman in the room asked the man sitting beside her, her eyes filled with confusion. Although Black Flame has indeed reached the domain realm, our task isn't something that can be accomplished with just superior combat standards. In my opinion, Black Flame isn't comparable even to Li Jia. I don't know, but the slot belongs to Scars. How she decides to use it is beyond my control. If we find out that Black Flame really isn't good enough, it won't be too late to replace him with someone else, the man named Burning Sea replied, smiling as he shook his head. While the two were conversing in private, Shi Feng had entered the room. The instant Shi Feng entered, the pair started scrutinizing him. Similarly, Shi Feng studied the duo. Who are these two people? Shi Feng was surprised when he inspected the duo using omniscient eyes. The man was a level 72 berserker named Burning Sea, and he had 5 pieces of epic equipment on him. As for the woman, she was a level 72 cleric named Frozen Gem. Although she sported only 3 pieces of epic equipment, the quality of her staff was indiscernible even with omniscient eyes. The equipment standards of these two players were undoubtedly among the best available in God's domain right now. Ordinary peak experts definitely were no match for them. Moreover, both players actually radiated an aura that was much more intense than that of a great lord. They also gave Shi Feng a strong sense of danger. However, Shi Feng couldn't pinpoint the source of that danger. Your Black Flame? Burning Sea asked in a questioning tone. That's right, Shi Feng answered, nodding. May I know what business Scars has sent you 2 over 4? Good. In that case, let me see whether you are qualified or not. Upon receiving a positive answer from Shi Feng, Burning Sea immediately unsheathed the great sword slung on his back and sent a sword light slashing at him. In the next moment, the sword light split into 12 copies of itself, each copy seemingly having a life of its own as they cut at Shi Feng from 12 different directions. Moreover, each sword light carried strength rivaling that of a great lord of the same level. All 12 sword lights attacked together like 12 great lord-ranked wolves pouncing on him simultaneously. Even domain realm experts might not be able to replicate Burning Sea's proficiency in combining a combat technique and a skill. Chapter 2194, Spiritualization Realm. Although Burning Sea was a Tier 2 berserker, his attacks were faster than even that of Tier 2 assassins. As if they had a life of their own, the 12 sword lights locked down Shi Feng, leaving him no room to dodge at all. How merciless. Frozen Gem was surprised by Burning Sea's attack. She had never thought that he would be even more ruthless than herself. The combat technique Burning Sea was using was an advanced combat technique called Wolfpack and was his trademark move. When he combined it with the Tier 2 skill Chaotic Flash, even domain realm experts would have an extremely difficult time coping with this move. After all, this was not a move that could be seen through and blocked easily. If Shi Feng wished to retreat unscathed in this cramped space, he would have to use a life-saving skill. Otherwise, if even one of the sword lights hit, Burning Sea would be able to capitalize on the situation and follow up with a series of moves, giving Shi Feng no room to breathe at all. Against such an assault, even shield warriors and guardian knights would fall quickly. However, contrary to Frozen Gems and Burning Sea's expectations, Shi Feng did not activate a life-saving skill despite the imminent arrival of the 12 sword lights. Instead, he brandished his 2 swords and met the 12 sword lights in battle. Sword's Orbit. The sword's orbit that Shi Feng was executing was markedly different from before. Now the technique looked much plainer and simpler. He also executed only a handful of slashes. Even so, these few slashes created a seemingly airtight defense around him, as all 12 sword lights had their attack trajectories twisted by an invisible force in the next moment. Like a pack of hungry wolves that stumbled across a mighty lion, the 12 sword lights took the initiative to detour around the swordsman. Spiritualization. His technique usage has already reached such a standard? Frozen Gem exclaimed when she saw Shi Feng smoothly and effortlessly neutralizing Burning Sea's attacks. Meanwhile, when Burning Sea saw this scene, he promptly halted his offensive and quietly eyed Feng as if he had just found some kind of treasure. Amazing. I never thought that you'd already be in the spiritualization realm. No wonder Scars wants to give her last slot to you. Burning Sea raved in excitement. While Burning Sea was talking, Aqua Rose had completed the incantation for her spell and was about to attack Burning Sea. However, Feng stopped her midway, then calmly asked, "May I know what you two are doing here? Also, what is this spiritualization realm you mentioned?" Feng was aware that Burning Sea's attack was some sort of test for him. This was obvious from how Burning Sea had stopped attacking as soon as Feng neutralized the Berserker's first move. As for the spiritualization realm the two spoke of, this was Feng's first time to hear about such a thing. Sorry. We are inviting you to help us with a very important mission. We cannot afford any carelessness on this mission, so we needed to test you. Still, I never thought you would be this powerful. As expected of the person Scar's views favorably, Burning Sea apologized sincerely. As for the spiritualization realm, it is a realm referring to the usage standard of combat techniques, which we discovered in God's domain. Of course, this is only a name we coined ourselves. As for what it is actually called, we aren't very sure either. I see. Realization immediately dawned upon Feng when he heard Burning Sea's words. May I know what Scars is asking me to do? The only realm he could think of that could be found in God's domain was the realms of truth. Apparently, Burning Sea's group had yet to come into contact with NPCs knowledgeable about the realms of truth or find any related information. Hence, they were referring to the realms of truth using a name of their own. It was also no wonder Feng felt that Burning Sea's Wolfpack was special. The Berserker's execution of Wolfpack was completely different from the average combat technique. He had obviously applied the principles of the realms of truth. However, when Feng thought about how other people had also come into contact with the realms of truth and had even achieved a certain amount of success in them, he was still surprised. Burning Sea in particular had clearly entered the truth realm already. This definitely wasn't good news to Feng. Now that other people were exploring the realms of truth, Zero Wing's advantages would undoubtedly decrease considerably. The only thing worth celebrating now was that Zero Wing had a systematic training system for the realms of truth, whereas other people would have to slowly explore and master the realms of truth on their own. We discovered a mysterious secret land in the Sea of Death, and we wish to raid it. Only that place is very special, tools cannot be used there and everyone is suppressed to tier 0. We can use only the most basic skills and spells. Moreover, entering and leaving the secret land are extremely difficult. Contact with the outside world is also impossible. We have gone through great lengths to obtain the entry slots for this secret land, so we need the help of experts like yourself to secure the treasures there, Frozen Gem explained. In a situation where tools could not be used and skills and spells were heavily suppressed, players could rely only on their own combat standards to fight inside the secret land. A mysterious secret land in the Sea of Death? Feng concealed his surprise at Frozen Gem's words. Could they be talking about one of the Thunder God's secret lands? The Sea of Death was considered a forbidden land for players because the Sea of Death was where the Thunder God had perished. The Thunder God had set up plenty of secret lands in the Sea of Death, every one of which contained a considerable number of treasures. There were even fragmented legendary items and peak legacies in some of these secret lands. In the past, players had gradually discovered the Thunder God's secret lands after level 80. The various powers then frantically explored these secret lands. Since these secret lands were one of the first few places where players started encountering fragmented legendary items, the intensity of the competition over these secret lands was obvious. However, the Thunder God's secret lands were located in another space, making them impossible to enter and leave through normal means. There were several ways to enter these secret lands, and one of the most reliable ways was by obtaining special quest items that were dropped only by level 70 plus sea monsters in the Sea of Death and then completing the quest these items provided. Another method was by obtaining the entry pass through killing special sea monsters. However, these special sea monsters did not appear in specific locations. Even if a first-rate guild went all out in search of these special sea monsters, they might not necessarily find one. The last method was by obtaining the guidance of the Thunder God's legacy and then completing a series of quests, which would then allow one to enter the Thunder God's secret lands. Feng had never imagined that Endless Scars would be lucky enough to be able to enter one of the Thunder God's secret lands now. Alright, but I want priority selection over one of the dropped items, Feng said after giving the matter some thought. he naturally couldn't provide his help for free. There were far too many excellent items inside the Thunder God's secret lands. Every item in these secret lands was a treasure that could help improve a player's strength significantly. However, these were not the things Feng was aiming for. Currently, the various superpowers were keeping a close eye on Zero Wing. So long as these superpowers spotted an opportunity, they would surely strike at the guild. Moreover, even with the advantages Stone Forest City provided, Zero Wing was only capable of keeping itself alive but not contending against these superpowers. If Zero Wing wished to face the various superpowers in a frontal confrontation, the guild itself needed to grow stronger. Now that Zero Wing had a stable supply of internal members, it was only a matter of time before the guild gained a new batch of experts. The only problem now was that these new experts would be very underleveled and would not be able to exhibit their full strength. Although the veteran experts of the guild normally helped the guild's low-leveled experts level up, these low-leveled experts would still take a long time to catch up to the frontline experts. Meanwhile, there was one item available inside the Thunder God's secret lands that could help players level up quickly. It was also something that countless powers had sought to obtain in the past. The Guild Alchemy Workshop design. The Guild Alchemy Workshop was an advanced construction that allowed the production of potions exclusive to guilds, such as the Experience Potion. Guild members could purchase up to 2 experience potions from the workshop every day. Moreover, only players that were at least 5 levels lower than the average level of frontline players could purchase and use this potion. This potion was a miracle drug that enabled new players to catch up to frontline players quickly. However, the Guild Alchemy Workshop design was extremely rare. It dropped in only a select few secret lands and special team dungeons, including the Thunder God's secret lands. This, hesitating, Burning Sea said, "We'll have to discuss this with our team leader. After all, this is something that concerns the entire team. The two of us don't have the power to decide on this." "That won't be a problem." Feng nodded in understanding. Burning Sea and Frozen Gem then went offline. By the looks of it, they were going to contact their team leader through the real world. After a short delay, Burning Sea and Frozen Gem came back online. "Guild leader Black Flame, I'm afraid we cannot agree to your request," Frozen Gem said resolutely. "You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."